She knocked on a stranger's door in the middle of a Montana blizzard and asked for scraps. Not money, not shelter, just whatever food he didn't want anymore. Her hands were shaking. Her pride was already in pieces. She had rehearsed those words 100 times walking through the snow, and every version of them still tasted like humiliation. The door opened, and the man standing there didn't hand her a plate of leftovers. He said 4 words that broke her completely open. "We don't serve leftovers." If you've ever had to ask for help when every part of you wanted to disappear, this story is for you. Subscribe to this channel, follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The knock was so quiet, Nathan Callahan almost didn't hear it. He was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of stew in front of him and a stack of papers he'd been staring at for the better part of an hour without actually reading. The fire in the wood stove had burned down to coals. Samuel was already in bed. The whole house had that particular silence that only happens in deep winter, that pressed heavy quiet like the world outside had wrapped itself in wool and refused to breathe. Then the knock came again, 3 times, soft, almost apologetic. Nathan pushed back from the table. He grabbed the lantern off the shelf near the door and pulled it open, and the cold came in like a living thing, reaching past him into the warm kitchen with cold fingers. There was a woman standing on his porch. She wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed somewhere around the middle of his chest, not quite the floor, not quite his face, like she'd trained herself not to make direct contact. She was wearing a coat that had once been brown and was now something closer to the color of old mud. It was torn at the left shoulder. Someone had tried to mend it, stitched it back together with thread that didn't quite match, and the patch had given up halfway through and come apart again. She was holding a Bible against her chest with both hands the way a child holds something they're afraid someone might take. And she was shaking. Not dramatically, not in a way that begged for sympathy. Just that fine, relentless trembling that happens when a body has been cold for too long and has simply stopped being able to fight it. Nathan stood there with the lantern in his hand. He waited. The woman opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again, and then in a voice so low he had to lean forward to catch it, she said, "I'm sorry to bother you. I was just wondering if you had any leftovers that you didn't need." She said it like she was confessing to something shameful, like just the asking of it cost her something she couldn't afford to spend. Nathan looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she shifted her weight, and he could see the instant flash of shame cross her face, the assumption that silence meant rejection, that the pause before an answer was always bad news. He stepped back from the doorway. "We don't serve leftovers here," he said. "Come inside. Dinner's waiting." She didn't move at first. That was the part Nathan would think about later in the years that followed, when he tried to piece together how everything began. She didn't step forward. She didn't thank him. She just stood there on the porch with her arms wrapped around that Bible and stared at him like he'd said something in a foreign language she hadn't quite translated yet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Dinner?" Nathan said again, jerking his chin toward the kitchen. "There's stew on the stove. It's getting cold. You're going to stand there or you're going to come in." Something moved across her face. Not relief exactly. More like suspicion, that careful, wounded wariness of a person who has been offered kindness before and learned the hard way what was attached to it. But she was cold, and she was hungry. And sometimes the body overrules the heart. She stepped inside. Nathan closed the door behind her. He set the lantern back on the shelf and moved to the stove without looking at her, because he understood instinctively, in the way that quiet men sometimes do, that she needed a moment without being watched. He heard her stop just inside the door. He heard the small sound of her exhaling long and shaking like she'd been holding her breath for hours and had only just remembered it was safe to let it go. He filled a bowl with stew, set it on the table, put a piece of bread beside it. Then he sat back down across from it and returned to his papers. "Sit down," he said without looking up. She sat. She ate. And for a while, neither of them said a single word. Her name was Clara Whitmore. She told him that about 10 minutes in when the stew was half gone and some color had started coming back into her face. She said it carefully, like a thing she was offering in trade for the meal information in exchange for food, the only currency she had left. Nathan looked up from his papers. "Nathan Callahan," he said. "I know," Clara replied. Then she looked down at her bowl. "People in town mentioned your ranch, said you were good for work sometimes. I wasn't trying to beg. I just thought maybe—" "You weren't begging," Nathan said. She looked up. "You asked if I had food I didn't need," he said. "That's not begging, that's just asking." Clara was quiet for a moment. "Most people don't see a difference," she said. "Most people aren't paying close enough attention," Nathan said. And then he went back to his papers, and she went back to her stew, and the wood stove crackled between them like a third presence in the room. Huck. She hadn't intended to tell him anything. Clara was 39 years old, though she looked older that winter, weathered by months of moving through cold and uncertainty. And she had learned somewhere along the years that the less you told strangers about yourself, the less they had to use against you. But Nathan didn't ask. That was the strange thing about him. He didn't pepper her with questions. He didn't press her for her story. He just sat across the table doing his own work while she ate his food, and somehow the silence was so uncrowded, so entirely without pressure, that she found herself filling it voluntarily. "I was married," she said. "His name was Henry. We had a farm outside of Billings, small, but it was ours." Nathan nodded, but didn't speak. "He died 2 years ago last March. Fever. Took him in 4 days. She paused. "We had debt, more than I knew. The bank took the land inside 6 months. "I'm sorry," Nathan said. "I've been moving since," Clara continued. "Laundry, sewing, cleaning, whatever anyone needed." She looked down at her hands, calloused, reddened, the knuckles cracked from cold water and lye soap. "I'm good at working. I've always been good at working. But this winter came early, and the last town I was in the work dried up, and I needed to keep moving." "Where are you headed?" Nathan asked. Clara was quiet. "Honestly," she said at last, "I'm not sure anymore." Something in Nathan's expression shifted. It wasn't pity. Clara had seen enough pity in the past 2 years to recognize it instantly and recoil from it. This was something else, something quieter. "You know anything about keeping books?" he asked. She blinked. "Accounting, records, supply lists, that kind of thing." "My father was an accountant," Clara said carefully. "He taught me everything before he passed. I worked his books for 6 years. Nathan was quiet for a moment. He looked at the stack of papers in front of him, the ones he'd been staring at all evening without getting anywhere with them. "My son is 8 years old," he said finally. "He needs someone to help him with reading and numbers. The ranch house needs managing. And I need someone who can look at these records and tell me why nothing is adding up the way it should." Clara looked at him across the table. "Are you offering me a job?" she asked. "I'm offering you temporary work and a place to sleep," Nathan said. "If you want it." She should have asked more questions. She should have been more careful. But the stew was warm, and the fire was burning, and outside the wind was building into something that had teeth in it. "All right," Clara said. And just like that, quietly, without ceremony, without either of them understanding yet what they were beginning, she stayed. The next morning, Clara woke up in a room that was small and plain, and smelled like cedarwood and old wool blankets, and for a full 30 seconds she lay perfectly still, trying to remember where she was. The ceiling was low. There was a window. Pale winter light was coming through it, thin and clean. A ranch house in Montana. A man she'd met the night before. She sat up fast, heart hammering the way it always did when reality came back too quickly. She'd learned to be light on her feet these past 2 years, to be ready to move, to never let herself sink too deeply into anything that could be taken away. She dressed quickly, made the bed, folded the extra blanket. When she came out into the main room, she found a boy sitting at the kitchen table. He was 8 years old, small for his age, with dark hair that had been combed with water but was already escaping in pieces. He was eating oatmeal. He was staring at her with enormous, serious brown eyes that didn't blink. Clara stopped. The boy didn't say anything. "Good morning," Clara said carefully. The boy continued to stare. "You must be Samuel," she said. "My father said you were staying," the boy said. His voice was flat and factual, the voice of a child who has learned to process information before feelings. "For a while." "That's right," Clara said, "if that's all right with you." Samuel considered this for a moment, with the gravity of someone being asked to sign a legal document. "Can you make biscuits?" he asked. "I can," Clara said. He looked back down at his oatmeal. "Papa's oatmeal is fine," he said, "but biscuits would be better." Clara almost smiled. "Then I'll make biscuits," she said. Nathan was already out in the fields before she'd finished breakfast. He'd left a note on the table, 3 lines in handwriting, that was neat but spare, like a man who chose his words carefully even when writing alone. It listed the things that needed doing in the house. Said Samuel's reading lesson should happen in the afternoon. Said the supply records were in the box on the far left shelf of the study. Clara read it twice. Then she looked around the kitchen. It was clean, scrupulously so. Everything had its place. Everything was organized, but there was a blankness to it, a kind of excessive order that she'd learned to recognize over the years. The order of a person who uses tidiness to hold things together. The order of someone fighting to maintain control over the small things, because the large ones had slipped beyond reach. She'd had a kitchen like this once, right after Henry died before she lost the farm. She'd cleaned and organized it every single day, more than necessary, as if a perfectly arranged pantry could somehow stand in for everything that was falling apart. She recognized it. This kitchen, this whole house. She understood it from the inside. She put the kettle on. She found flour butter, a little salt. She made biscuits the way her mother had taught her, by feel, not measurement, pressing the dough gently with her knuckles until it was just right. When Samuel smelled them from the other room, he appeared in the kitchen doorway like a small ghost. He didn't say anything. He just watched her work. "You can sit at the table," Clara said without turning around. "I won't bite." He sat, and for the first time in a long while, there was something in the Callahan kitchen that hadn't been there before. Something warm that wasn't just the stove. She found the records that afternoon. The box Nathan had mentioned was sitting on the shelf exactly where he'd said, but when Clara lifted it down and opened it, she understood immediately why he hadn't been able to make sense of them himself. They weren't simply disorganized. They were actively misleading. Clara sat down at the small desk in the study and began going through them slowly, the way her father had taught her, not rushing, not jumping to conclusions, just reading every number in order and letting the pattern build itself. Feed prices, livestock sales, contract payments, supply invoices. She went through the first year of records, then the second. By the third, her hands had gone very still on the papers. She sat back in the chair. "Oh," she said quietly to no one. The numbers were wrong. Not randomly wrong the way accounts get when someone is careless or overwhelmed. They were wrong in a specific direction. Every error, every discrepancy, every inflated cost and delayed payment and hidden fee, they all pointed the same way. Away from Nathan Callahan, toward someone else. She pulled out a fresh piece of paper. She picked up the pencil, and she started from the beginning. Samuel appeared in the doorway of the study around 4 o'clock. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, trying to look casual in the way that children do when they desperately want something but are afraid to say so directly. "Is it time for my lesson?" he asked. Clara looked up. She had ink on her fingers, and the afternoon light had shifted while she wasn't paying attention, dropping the room into the golden shadow of late winter sun. "It is?" she said. She gathered the papers into a careful pile and set them aside. "What are you working on in reading?" "I'm not working on anything," Samuel said. "Because you don't have books, or because the school teacher left?" Samuel said matter-of-factly. 3 months ago, she got married and moved to Helena. Papa said a new one is coming in spring, but... He shrugged one shoulder. "It's not spring yet." Clara looked at him. "Can you read it all?" she asked. "Some." Samuel said with the careful precision of a child who has been asked this question before and knows the answer is disappointing. "Words with short sounds, not the long ones." "All right," Clara said. "Show me what you have. Any book. Whatever's around." Samuel disappeared and came back a minute later with a worn copy of a farmer's almanac and very deliberately his father's Bible. Clara looked at the Bible. "That's Papa's," Samuel said. "But he lets me hold it. He said it's the best book for learning words because it has all of them." Something pulled tight in Clara's chest. She reached into her coat, the coat she'd draped over the back of the chair, and took out her own Bible. The same one she'd carried across 3 counties and a Montana winter held against her chest on a stranger's porch. She set it on the desk. Samuel stared at it. "You have one too," he said. "I do," Clara said. "Why do you carry it with you?" She thought about that for a moment. "Because it's the one thing that's always mine," she said. "No matter where I go, no matter what I lose." Samuel nodded slowly with a gravity that made him seem much older than 8. "That's why Papa keeps his," he said quietly. "Since Mama died, he says it's the one thing that doesn't change." Clara didn't answer. She opened her Bible to the first chapter of Genesis, smoothed the page, and slid it across the desk to Samuel. "Let's start at the beginning," she said. "That's always the best place." Nathan came in from the fields at dusk. He was cold in the way that outdoor work in Montana winter makes a man cold, deep cold in the bones, the kind that takes an hour by a fire to work out. He stamped his boots at the door, hung his coat, ran both hands over his face. Then he stopped. Something was different about the kitchen. It took him a moment to identify it. The table was set. He set the table himself every night, so that wasn't it. The stove was going also normal. The stew pot was on numb. Not stew. Something else. Nathan crossed to the stove and lifted the lid off the pot and stood very still. Roasted chicken, with root vegetables, and something underneath the smell of chicken, something sweet and yeasty. He turned around. Clara was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the main room, wiping her hands on a cloth, watching him with that same careful steadiness she'd had since the moment she walked in the door. "I hope that's all right," she said. There were 2 chickens in the yard that Samuel said weren't laying anymore. "I didn't think you'd object, but I should have asked." "No," Nathan said. "I don't object." He paused. "Where's Samuel?" "Washing up. He worked hard today. We got through the first chapter of Genesis and all the way into Exodus." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "He doesn't usually sit still that long," he said. "He's curious," Clara said simply. "He just needed someone to notice that." Nathan looked at her, and for just a moment, just a flicker of something. The locked-down, careful expression he wore like armor shifted slightly, like a window being opened a quarter of an inch in a room that's been sealed for years. Then Samuel came running in from the hallway, and the moment closed. "Papa, I can read Exodus Clara showed me." "I heard," Nathan said. He met Clara's eyes over Samuel's head. She looked away first. "Let's eat," she said. Dad. 3 days into her stay, Clara went back to the records. She'd been thinking about them constantly at the stove in the middle of Samuel's lessons, lying awake in the cedar-smelling room at night. The patterns she'd found were clear enough on their own, but she needed to understand the source. She needed to trace the inflated numbers back to whoever was submitting them. The name that kept appearing was Walter Crane. It appeared on the feed contracts, on the livestock sale agreements, on the supply invoices. Walter Crane of Crane Commercial Trading. Helena, Montana. A name printed at the top of too many documents in Nathan's box, always in the same formal letterhead, always signed with a long, confident signature that took up almost the whole bottom of the page. Clara pulled out every document that bore his name. There were 19 of them. She spread them across the desk in chronological order and began reading. The first contract was from 2 years ago. Feed prices slightly high, but within a range that could be explained by drought or short supply. She noted it and moved on. The second contract higher. But Nathan had signed it without question. A man in grief trying to keep a ranch running while raising a child alone didn't always have the attention to spare for fine print. The third contract higher still. And there, buried in the middle of a clause about delivery schedules, a phrase that made Clara's pencil stop moving across the page. Supplier retains the right to adjust pricing at time of delivery based on market conditions. She read it twice. Then she read it a third time very slowly. It meant that Crane could charge Nathan whatever he wanted at the time of delivery, regardless of what the contract said. It meant that every signed agreement was worth nothing. It meant that Nathan had been operating for 2 years under the belief that he had fixed costs, when in reality, every cost was at the mercy of one man's discretion. "Oh, you clever snake," Clara said quietly. She started writing. Nathan found her there at 11 o'clock that night. He hadn't been able to sleep. That wasn't unusual. Sleep had been a negotiation rather than a certainty ever since Eleanor died, and this particular winter had been worse than most. He came downstairs for water and saw the light under the study door. He knocked once and pushed it open. Clara was at the desk surrounded by papers. She had her hair pinned back loosely, and there was a smudge of ink on her jaw that she hadn't noticed. She looked up when he came in. For a half second she looked almost guilty, like she'd been caught at something. "It's late," Nathan said. "I know," Clara said. "I'm sorry. I'll put these away." "I didn't say stop," Nathan said. He pulled the other chair up to the edge of the desk and sat down. "What did you find?" Clara looked at him. She seemed to be deciding something. Then she turned the papers toward him and said, "How well do you know Walter Crane?" Nathan's expression didn't change, but something behind it did a slight tightening around the eyes. "He handles my contracts," Nathan said. "Has since my wife died. I didn't have the time to manage them myself, and he came with good references." "Who gave those references?" Clara asked. Nathan thought about it. "Dunbar," he said. "Over at the Dunbar Ranch. He said Crane was reliable." "I'd be interested to know what Dunbar's records look like," Clara said quietly. Nathan was still for a moment. "Talk to me, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Clara," she said automatically. Then she turned the contracts around so Nathan could see them. "This clause right here, this line about adjusting prices at delivery. Do you remember signing this?" Nathan leaned over and read the line she was pointing to. His jaw tightened slightly. "I remember signing the contract," he said. "I don't remember reading every line." "Most people don't," Clara said. Not accusing, just stating. Especially when they trust the person who wrote it. "What does it mean?" "It means every price in every contract you've signed with Crane is optional as far as he's concerned. It means the number you agreed to on paper is just a suggestion. It means—" She paused. "It means he's been charging you whatever he wanted for 2 years, and you've been paying it." Nathan sat very still. The fire in the small study grate burned down another inch. "How much?" he asked. Clara looked at the number she'd written on the fresh sheet at the top of the pile. She slid it across to him. Nathan looked at it. He didn't say anything. He didn't move. And then very quietly, in a voice that was controlled in the way that a man's voice gets when the alternative is something he doesn't want to show, he said, "That's 3 years of work." "Yes," Clara said softly. "It is." They sat there in the quiet study, the papers spread between them, the fire burning low. "I need to find the invoices," Clara said after a moment. If we can match what he charged against what you actually received, what the merchants in town actually sold him, we can show the difference. We can show what he kept." "You think we can prove it?" Nathan said. "I think," Clara said carefully, "that a man who's been stealing through paperwork depends very heavily on the other person not understanding the paperwork. Yes, I think we can prove it." Nathan was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at her, across the desk. Really looked at her the way he hadn't quite allowed himself to yet, and said, "Why are you doing this?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Because it's wrong," she said simply. "And because you fed me dinner." A beat of silence. And then, for the first time since she'd arrived at this ranch, Nathan Callahan almost smiled. She started going into town 2 days later. Not to shop, to talk. Clara had learned in the years of moving from place to place that information lives in conversations. That the things people know, merchants, suppliers, neighbors, are almost never written down anywhere. That the real record of any business is held in the memories of the people who were part of it. She went to the feed store first. The man behind the counter was named Hicks, and he had the look of someone who'd been sitting in the same spot for 20 years and knew the answer to most questions before they were asked. "Nathan Callahan's ranch," she said. "I'm helping him with his supply records. I was hoping you could tell me what you've been charging for alfalfa this season." Hicks gave her the number. Clara wrote it down. Then she said very carefully, "And has that price changed in the last 2 years?" Hicks frowned. "Gone up some, but not by much. Prices have been steady since the summer drought ended. Maybe 5% over 2 years. Nothing like what some of the traveling traders charge." "Traveling traders?" Clara said. "Crane and his like," Hicks said, in a tone that managed to say everything without technically saying it. "The ones who buy from us and mark up on delivery. I don't like to speak ill, but—" He paused. "You ask anyone in this valley, they'll tell you Crane's prices have been heading in one direction." "Up," Clara said. "Sharp up," Hicks said. "And only for the ranches that don't come by direct." Clara thanked him and left. She visited 3 more merchants that day. By the time she walked back to the ranch in the early dark, the piece of paper she'd brought into town had numbers written on both sides. She went straight to the study. She sat down at the desk. She put Crane's invoice prices beside the actual merchant prices, and she began to calculate what the difference added up to, not just in one season, but across 23 months, across cattle sales and feed contracts and supply orders and equipment purchases, across every single transaction where Walter Crane had stood between Nathan Callahan and the people he actually did business with. When she finished, she sat back in the chair and looked at the number at the bottom of the page. She picked up the pencil and checked it twice. Then she looked at the ceiling for a moment, very still. "Nathan," she called. He appeared in the doorway. "Come look at this," she said. He crossed to the desk and looked over her shoulder at the paper. A long silence. "That's what he took," Clara said quietly. "Not what he earned, not his fees. That's the difference between what you paid and what the goods actually cost. That's what's in his pocket right now, that should be in yours." Nathan didn't speak. His hand rested on the edge of the desk, and Clara noticed that it pressed harder than it needed to, that slight white-knuckle tension of a man holding himself very carefully in place. "Can you write all of this up?" he said at last. "In a way that can be read, that someone else could follow." "I already started," Clara said. Nathan straightened up. He looked at her, and this time it wasn't the brief glance of a man keeping appropriate distance from a woman he barely knows. It was a long, full look, the look of someone genuinely trying to understand what they're seeing. "You've been here 6 days," he said. "Yes," Clara said. "You came to my door asking for scraps," he said. "I did," Clara said evenly. "And now you're the one who might save this ranch," he said. Clara met his eyes. "That depends," she said, "on whether you're willing to fight for it." Nathan held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "I've been fighting for it since the day my wife died. I just didn't know I was fighting the wrong enemy." He turned and walked back to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Without looking back, he said, "Thank you, Clara." It was the first time he'd used her name. She heard the door to the hallway close behind him, and Clara Whitmore sat alone in the lamplight with 23 months of stolen numbers in front of her, and the growing, terrifying, quietly hopeful understanding that she had just found something she hadn't been looking for. A place where her help actually mattered. A place that might need her to stay. She picked up the pencil. She went back to work. Outside, the Montana wind came down off the mountains and pressed against the walls of the Callahan Ranch, and for the first time all winter, the house held. Clara didn't sleep that night. Not really. She lay in the small cedar room, listening to the wind work itself against the walls of the house, and her mind kept running the numbers. Not because she needed to check them again, she'd already checked them 3 times, but because her brain refused to let go of the shape of what she'd found. The way the theft was constructed. The patience of it. The elegance, if you could call something that ugly by that name. Walter Crane hadn't stolen from Nathan Callahan the way desperate men steal quickly, recklessly, in ways that leave obvious marks. He'd stolen the way a slow leak steals from a water barrel, a little at a time, in places you weren't looking. Until one day you reached in and found the bottom. Clara stared at the ceiling. She thought about Nathan's face when she'd shown him the number. She thought about the way his hand had pressed into the edge of the desk. She had seen that look before, not on Nathan's face specifically, but on the faces of people she'd grown up around. Her father had worn it once in the last year of his life when he realized that a business partner he'd trusted for 15 years had been slowly, methodically draining everything they'd built together. That particular expression, not anger, not yet, but the first arrival of a betrayal so large the mind couldn't process it all at once. She knew it. She recognized its weight. And she knew that what came after it, if you weren't careful, wasn't always anger. Sometimes it was surrender. She sat up in the dark. That was the thing she was afraid of. Not Walter Crane, not even the size of what he'd taken. She was afraid that Nathan Callahan, a man who had already absorbed more loss than most people could carry, might look at 23 months of stolen numbers and decide that he simply didn't have the fight left. She got up before dawn. She put the kettle on. She made biscuits, not because anyone had asked, but because her hands needed something to do while her mind worked. By the time she heard Nathan's boots on the stairs, the kitchen smelled like warm bread and coffee, and she had her thoughts arranged into something she could actually say out loud. He came in, stopped briefly, and looked at her with the expression of a man who has already been awake for hours, despite having been in bed. "You didn't sleep either," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "Some," Nathan said, which meant no. He poured himself coffee and stood at the counter with his back half turned to her, looking out the window at the gray pre-dawn sky, and Clara understood that he needed a minute. She gave it to him. She pulled the biscuits from the oven and set them on the table and waited. Finally, Nathan turned around. "If I go after Crane," he said, "he'll fight back." "Yes," Clara said. "He has money, he has lawyers, he has 20 years of relationships in this territory that I don't have." "Yes," Clara said again. "And I have a boy to raise and a ranch to keep running and no guarantee that even if I'm right, anyone with authority will take my side over his." Clara looked at him squarely. "Everything you just said is true," she said. "And I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Going after Walter Crane will be hard. It might be costly. It might take longer than you want and cost more than you expect, and there will be moments when it would be easier to let it go." Nathan was watching her. "But," Clara said. "But," he repeated quietly. "But he is still doing it," Clara said. "Right now, today. Whatever he took from you in the past 2 years, he is still taking. And if you don't stop him, he will keep taking until there is nothing left to take. And then he will walk away and find someone else and do it all over again." She paused. "I've seen men like Crane my whole life. They don't stop because they feel guilty. They stop because someone makes them stop." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan set down his coffee cup. "How long would it take you to put together something solid?" he asked. "Something that would hold up if someone really looked at it." Clara thought about that. 2 weeks, she said. Maybe less. I need to go back into town, talk to more merchants, get prices in writing where I can. I need to trace 3 or 4 of his biggest invoices all the way from what he charged you back to what he actually paid. "And you think you can do that?" "I know I can do that," Clara said. It wasn't arrogance. It was just the particular confidence of someone who has spent their whole life being good at something and finally found a place where that thing matters. Nathan held her gaze for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. "Then let's talk about where to start," he said. And they did right there at the kitchen table over coffee and biscuits, while the sun came up outside and Samuel's footsteps eventually appeared overhead, moving around in his room, and the ranch day began to open up around them like it did every morning. Except this morning was different. This morning, for the first time in Nathan Callahan's life, he wasn't facing the problem alone. He just hadn't quite let himself feel that yet. The first person Clara needed to find was a man named Ed Proctor. Hicks at the feed store had mentioned him in passing the second time she'd visited, when she asked if there was anyone who'd done business directly with Crane and been willing to talk about it. Hicks had gone quiet in that particular way of a man who knows something he's not sure he should say, and then he'd said carefully, "You might ask Ed Proctor over at the Proctor place about 4 miles east. He used to deal with Crane, doesn't anymore." Clara borrowed Nathan's second horse, a steady bay mare named Ruth, who did not like being rushed and communicated this through subtle acts of passive resistance, and rode out to the Proctor place on a Tuesday morning. Ed Proctor was a compact, weathered man, somewhere in his 60s, who answered the door with his hat already on and the air of someone perpetually on their way somewhere else. He looked at Clara with the open, uncomplicated assessment of a man who has lived far enough from social pretense that he just looked at people directly. "You're the woman staying at the Callahan place," he said. "Word travels," Clara said. "It's Montana," Ed said. "Word is mostly what we've got." He tilted his head. "What do you want?" "5 minutes," Clara said. "About Walter Crane." Something moved behind Ed Proctor's eyes, just a flicker quickly controlled. "Come in," he said. He led her into a kitchen that was smaller than Nathan's, but considerably more chaotic, pulled out a chair for her at the table, and stood across from it with his arms folded. "What do you want to know?" he said. "You used to deal with him," Clara said. "You don't anymore. I want to understand why." Ed was quiet for a moment. "That's a can of worms you're asking me to open," he said. "I know," Clara said. "I'm asking anyway." Another pause. Then Ed unfolded his arms and pulled out the other chair and sat down, which told Clara everything she needed to know about which direction this was going. 3 years ago, Ed said, "I signed a supply contract with Crane. Seemed like a good deal. Fixed prices, reliable delivery. Someone else handling the logistics. I was dealing with my wife being sick, and I didn't want to be running into town every other week." He stopped. "End of the first season, my costs were higher than the contract said. I went to Crane. He showed me some clause about market adjustment. I didn't remember signing anything like it, but there it was. My name." Clara's pencil was moving. "Second season," Ed continued. "Same thing. Higher costs. Different excuses. I started keeping my own records that year. Started writing down every delivery, every price, every conversation." He paused. "Third season, I had enough. I showed up at Crane's office in Helena with my records and told him we were done. He told me I was confused about what I'd agreed to. I told him a judge might like to have a look at both our sets of numbers and decide who was confused." Clara looked up. "What happened?" she asked. "He settled," Ed said flatly. "Quietly. Paid back about half what I could prove he owed me. Made me sign something saying I wouldn't discuss the matter publicly." He held Clara's gaze. "I'm not sure a handshake conversation qualifies as public discussion." "Did you keep your records?" Clara asked. Ed Proctor's eyes narrowed very slightly. I kept everything, he said, down to the last piece of paper. Mr. Proctor, Clara said carefully, Nathan Callahan is facing the same thing you faced, except he's been in it 2 years longer, and he's got a young son, and he's already fighting to keep the ranch from going under. I'm trying to build a case that would hold up to scrutiny, real scrutiny, not just a private settlement that disappears quietly. She leaned forward. If there were two ranchers with documented records, showing the same pattern, the same clauses, the same methodology, that's not a dispute anymore. That's a pattern. And patterns are harder to explain away than isolated complaints. Ed was quiet for a long moment. Outside wind shifted through the eaves of his house. That woman you mentioned, he said finally. Callahan's wife, Eleanor. I knew her. Known Nathan since before Samuel was born. He looked down at the table. It's a hard thing what happened to that family. Yes, Clara said. And you're the woman who knocked on his door, Ed said. Clara blinked. You heard about that. Mrs. Jensen at the dry goods store mentioned it, Ed said. Said there was a woman staying at the Callahan place who'd walked in from the cold and started reorganizing everything. He looked at her steadily. Said it like it was a remarkable thing. Clara felt heat rise in her face. It wasn't remarkable, she said. He was kind to me, and I found a problem, and I knew how to fix it. That's all. Ed Proctor looked at her for a long measuring moment. Then he stood up and said, I'll get my records. She was back at the ranch by early afternoon with Ed Proctor's records bundled under her arm, and something new humming in her chest that was somewhere between hope and fear. Nathan was mending fence on the east side of the property. She could see him from a distance, the measured repetitive movement of a man working alone, and she almost called out to him. But something made her wait. Let him finish what he was doing. Let herself sit down with Ed's records first and understand what she actually had before she raised his hopes. She went to the study. She spread Ed's papers beside her own columns, and what she found in the comparison made her sit very still for almost a full minute. The clauses were word for word identical. Not similar. Not in the same general style. Word for word. The same sentence buried in the same position in the contract using the same phrasing down to the punctuation. And the pattern of price escalation, the rate at which Crane increased charges over the first, second, and third seasons, was within a few percentage points of identical across both ranches. Clara set down her pencil. She thought about what that meant. It meant Crane had a system. A repeatable, deliberate, pre-designed system that he applied to multiple clients simultaneously. Which meant there were almost certainly others. Which meant Ed Proctor wasn't the second victim. He was probably somewhere in the middle of a list that had names at the top Clara hadn't found yet. She had thought she was building a case for one ranch. What she might actually be building was something much larger. Her hands had gone very still on the papers. This was not the moment to get ahead of herself. She knew that. She had learned from years of careful accounting that the most dangerous point in any investigation was the moment when you thought you understood everything, because that was exactly when you stopped looking carefully. She picked up her pencil. She went back to work. She was still working when Nathan knocked on the study door an hour later. He came in and looked at the papers spread across the desk, and then at her face, which apparently told him something because his expression shifted immediately. "What is it?" he said. Clara held out Ed Proctor's contract. She pointed to the clause. Nathan read it. Then she handed him a copy of his own contract opened to the same page with the same line underlined. He read them both. Looked up. "They're the same," he said. "Word for word," Clara said. "Meaning he does this to everyone," Nathan said. "Meaning he did it to Ed Proctor," Clara said. "And to you? And I would bet my last dollar that if we asked around this valley carefully enough, we would find more." She paused. "Ed Proctor's willing to come forward. He has records. Together with yours, that's 2 ranches showing the same contract language, the same escalation pattern, and the same methodology. That's not a misunderstanding. That's not a dispute. That's fraud." Nathan was quiet. Fraud, he repeated like he was hearing the word for the first time. What Crane has been doing has a name, Clara said, and more importantly, it has a remedy. The law, Nathan said. It wasn't quite a question, more like a man testing the weight of a word he wasn't sure he trusted. There's a circuit judge who comes through Billings twice a year, Clara said. I asked Hicks about it while I was in town. The next session is in March. That gives us 6 weeks. She held his gaze. 6 weeks to build something solid enough that a judge can't dismiss it. Nathan looked at her for a long moment. 6 weeks, he said. It's enough, Clara said. If we work. We, Nathan said. Something in the air between them shifted slightly, not dramatically, not in any way either of them acknowledged out loud, but Clara heard it in the way he said the word, and she was honest enough with herself to notice the way something in her own chest responded to it. You're not in this alone anymore, she said, simply, directly. Nathan looked down at the papers on the desk. I've been alone for a long time, he said, not asking for pity, just stating a fact the way he stated most things. I know, Clara said. It's strange, he said quietly, having someone in the house again, having someone in this room. He paused. Good strange. I didn't expect it. Clara didn't answer that. She looked back at the papers because that felt safer. We should also talk about Crane coming here, she said. Nathan straightened up. What do you mean? He'll come, Clara said. At some point in the next few weeks, he'll come to collect payment or push a new contract. And when he does, we need to be ready. We can't show our hand before we're finished building the case, but we also can't let him do anything that makes the situation worse. What do I say to him? Nothing unusual, Clara said. Talk to him the way you always have. Agree to whatever he says needs to be discussed at the next meeting. Don't sign anything, don't argue. Just be Nathan Callahan dealing with his business affairs. She paused. And then come and tell me everything he said word for word. Nathan studied her. You've done this before, he said. Not exactly this, Clara said. But I watched my father deal with a situation that was similar in some ways. The person who came for him was smarter about covering his tracks, but the principle was the same. She stopped. What happened? Nathan asked. To your father? Clara was quiet for a moment. He didn't have anyone helping him, she said. He tried to fight it alone. And he was a brilliant man. My father genuinely brilliant with numbers, but it wore him down. Fighting alone wears you down. Something moved across Nathan's face. I'm sorry, he said. It was a long time ago, Clara said. Which was true. It was also not entirely the point she'd been making, but she let it stand. She started gathering the papers into their piles. I'm going to need to go back into town Thursday, she said. There are 2 more merchants I haven't spoken to yet, and I want to look at public records land filings if I can get access to them. Crane has been operating in this territory for years. There might be filings that show the scope of his business in ways we can't see just from the contracts. I'll drive you, Nathan said. Clara looked up. You don't need to. I drive the supply wagon into town on Thursdays anyway, Nathan said. Samuel can come. He's been asking to go to the library. They have a library, Clara said, surprised. The corner of Nathan's mouth moved that near smile that she'd now seen twice and had already begun to quietly wait for. It's 4 shelves and a donated collection from Helena, he said. But Samuel treats it like it's the Library of Congress. Clara found herself smiling. He's a remarkable boy, she said. He is, Nathan said. And his voice when he said it had something in it that was completely different from the controlled, careful tone he used for everything else, something unguarded and warm and entirely undefended. That was the first time Clara understood that Nathan Callahan wasn't actually a closed man. He was a man who had closed himself. There was a difference, and the difference mattered. She tucked the papers safely into their folder. Good night, Nathan, she said. Good night, Clara, he said. He left the study. She heard his footsteps in the hall, then on the stairs. She sat in the lamplight for a moment before getting up. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks to dismantle what Walter Crane had spent years building. She was ready. Thursday came with cold, clean air and a sky so blue it almost hurt. Samuel appeared at breakfast wearing his good coat, which Clara noted was slightly too short in the arms, a fact she filed away without comment, and ate his oatmeal at twice his normal speed, the way children eat when they're too excited to actually taste anything. "The library will have the same books it had last time," Nathan told him without looking up. "They might have gotten new ones," Samuel said. "They got new ones in October," Nathan said. "It's January." "But what if someone donated something?" Nathan looked up and caught Clara's eye across the table. Clara pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "We'll check," Nathan said. "Eat your oatmeal." Samuel ate his oatmeal. The ride into town in the supply wagon was 40 minutes over frozen ground, and Samuel spent most of it asking Clara questions. Not shy, careful questions. He'd already moved past that stage somewhere around the second week of their reading lessons. But the full-forward, unfiltered questions of a child who has decided a person is trustworthy and is now making up for lost time. "What was it like living in Billings?" he asked. "Busier than here," Clara said. "More people. More noise. Did you like it?" "I liked parts of it." "What parts?" "The library," Clara said. Samuel looked at her with naked delight. "Papa, she likes libraries too," he announced. "I heard," Nathan said from the front of the wagon. "Did you have a garden?" "I had a small one," Clara said. "Mostly vegetables. Some flowers." "What kind of flowers?" "Samuel," Nathan said. "I'm asking." Samuel said entirely without apology. "Hollyhocks," Clara said. "And blue flax. My mother grew blue flax. I always plant it wherever I go." "Is that why you planted seeds in the kitchen garden?" Samuel asked. "Because you were going to plant flax." Clara looked at him. "You noticed that," she said. "I notice everything," Samuel said. This was delivered with complete seriousness, as simple fact, and Clara was suddenly, unexpectedly, viciously grateful for this child in a way she hadn't anticipated. She looked away quickly before she did something embarrassing like tear up in a farm wagon on a January morning. "Yes," she said. "That's why." Nathan, who had been quiet for the better part of this exchange, said nothing. But his shoulders had a slightly different quality to them than they'd had at the start of the ride. Town was busy for a January morning. Clara left Nathan and Samuel at the general store and went first to find the county clerk's office, a small building behind the post office, managed by a thin, precise man named Garrett, who wore sleeve garters and handled inquiries with the polite suspicion of someone who guarded his records like personal property. "Land filings," Clara said. "I'm looking for records of commercial operation filings in the valley, specifically anything under Walter Crane or Crane Commercial Trading." Garrett looked at her over the tops of his glasses. "May I ask why?" he said. "I'm doing accounting work for the Callahan Ranch," Clara said. "Supply contracts need to be verified." This was true. It was also carefully incomplete, which was its own form of truth. Garrett considered her for a moment. Then he turned and went to his filing cabinet. He came back with 3 folders. Clara sat at the small table Garrett indicated and opened the first folder. 20 minutes later, she sat back. She had found something she wasn't looking for. Crane Commercial Trading had a silent partner. The name on the secondary filing was listed as D. Whitfield. Clara stared at the name. She knew that name. D. Whitfield. Daniel Whitfield. He was the Territorial Land Commissioner, the man who oversaw property disputes and foreclosures in this part of Montana. The man who, if Nathan Callahan were ever pushed far enough into debt that he defaulted on his land holdings, would be the one signing the paperwork that transferred the property. Crane hadn't just been stealing from Nathan. If Nathan's debt became unsustainable, which it was well on its way to becoming, Whitfield could oversee the foreclosure. And Crane, as a business partner, would benefit from whatever came next. They weren't just robbing Nathan Callahan. They were positioned to take his land. Clara's hand was steady when she copied down the name and the filing number. She had trained herself over years of careful work not to react visibly to what she found in numbers and documents, because reaction clouded judgment. But on the inside, something had gone very cold. She thanked Garrett. She left the office. She stood outside in the January air for a moment. Then she went to find Nathan. He was at the hardware counter sorting through a list of things he needed. Samuel was not in sight, which meant he'd already found his way to the library's 4 shelves. Clara touched Nathan's arm the first time she'd touched him deliberately, and she noted his slight stillness at the contact and said quietly, "We need to talk. Not here. When we're back at the ranch." Nathan looked at her face. He read it correctly, and immediately the way she was learning he often did. "That bad," he said quietly. "It's complicated," Clara said. "But yes." Nathan looked at the hardware list in his hand. Then he set it on the counter and said to the store owner, "I'll be back in 20 minutes for all of this. Can you have it ready?" "Sure enough," the man said. Nathan steered Clara outside, away from the store window, away from where they might be easily overheard. "Tell me now," he said. "I won't be able to think about anything else for the whole ride home," Clara told him. She told him about the secondary filing, the name, what it meant. Nathan was very still while she talked. When she finished, he didn't say anything for a moment. A man and woman walked past them on the street nodding pleasantly. Nathan nodded back, smiled, waited until they were past. Then the smile dropped. "Whitfield," he said. "He processed my land deed when I first bought the east pasture, 3 years ago." "3 years ago," Clara said, "which is when your contract with Crane began." Nathan looked at the ground. He was working through something. She could see it, the internal processing of a man who thinks slowly but thinks deeply. "So Crane brings in ranchers," Nathan said. "Drains them over 2-3 years. If the ranch fails, Whitfield oversees the foreclosure." "And whatever happens to the land after that," Clara said, "benefits both of them." "They're farming ranchers," Nathan said. "Very quiet, very still." "Yes," Clara said. "How many ranches are in this valley?" Clara met his eyes. "That's exactly what I've been asking myself," she said. The sky was very blue above them. Somewhere down the street she could hear the sounds of ordinary commerce. A wagon being unloaded, 2 men arguing pleasantly about nothing important, a child shouting. Nathan Callahan stood in the cold January street and understood for the first time the full shape of what had been done to him. This wasn't a greedy businessman taking advantage of a grieving widower. This was a machine. And he had walked straight into it. "Nathan," Clara said, his name directly, the way she'd learned to use it when she needed him to look at her instead of at the ground. He looked at her. "This makes the case bigger," she said. "It also makes it harder. We're not just talking about a contract dispute anymore. We're talking about a filing that implicates a territorial official." "Which means going to the circuit judge isn't enough," Nathan said. "It might need to go higher," Clara said. "I don't know yet. I need to think." She paused. "What I do know is that we cannot move on any of this until the case is complete. Everything documented, everything verified, everything organized in a way that cannot be picked apart. If we go at Crane and miss, and he has a government partner, the response will be, it will be worse than losing the ranch." Nathan was quiet. Then he said, "How many people do you think he's done this to?" Clara thought about it. "At least Ed Proctor," she said. "Possibly 6 or 8 others, if the filings are any indication of his client list." She stopped. "Possibly more." A long, cold silence. "They should know," Nathan said. "Yes," Clara said. "They should. But not yet. Not until we're ready." She held his gaze. "Can you trust me on the timing?" Nathan looked at her. In his eyes, she saw the effort it cost him, a naturally self-sufficient man, being asked to wait to hold, to trust someone else's judgment on something this large. But he nodded. "Yes," he said. "I can trust you." Clara breathed out. "Good," she said. "Then let's get Samuel from the library and go home. I have 6 weeks of work to do, and I'd like to start this afternoon." Something moved across Nathan's face. She turned away before she could look at it too long. They walked back down the street together through the January cold, not touching, not speaking, but with the particular quality of closeness that exists between two people who have just decided quietly and without ceremony that they are in this together, all the way to the end. Chan. That night, after Samuel was in bed and the house was quiet, Clara sat at the study desk with all of it spread before her. Nathan's contracts, Ed Proctor's records, the county filing with Whitfield's name, and she understood with a clarity that was both frightening and clarifying that she had stumbled into something much larger than a widow asking for leftovers at a rancher's door. She had come to Nathan Callahan's house with nothing: a torn coat, an old Bible, a desperate, humiliating need for a meal. And somehow, in the weeks since that knock on his door, she had become the most important person on this ranch. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. She wasn't sure she had a category for it. She pulled the fresh paper toward her and started writing, because writing was the one thing that always made sense when everything else was too complicated for words. Across the hall, she heard Nathan moving in his study, the quiet sounds of a man who couldn't settle. Papers shifting, a chair adjusting. Not alone. Neither of them tonight was alone. She kept writing. Outside, the Montana wind ran across the top of the house and kept going out over the frozen fields and the dark pastures and the sleeping cattle out over all of it, this ranch that two people were quietly, carefully, stubbornly fighting to save. And the night held. The letter arrived on a Monday. Clara was in the kitchen teaching Samuel long division when she heard Nathan's boots stop moving in the hallway. That particular stillness that she'd learned in the weeks she'd been here meant something had shifted. Not the stillness of a man resting. The stillness of a man reading something that required him to hold very carefully still. She kept her voice even for Samuel's benefit. "Carry the remainder down," she said. "Try it again." Samuel tried it again, but her ears were tracking the hallway. Nathan appeared in the kitchen doorway 30 seconds later. He was holding a folded piece of paper. His face was doing that thing. It did the controlled, deliberately neutral expression that he wore when what he was actually feeling was something he hadn't decided to let out yet. "Samuel," he said, "go check on the water trough in the east paddock." Samuel looked up from his division problem with the sharp alertness of a child who understands perfectly well when adults are moving him out of a room. "It's cold," Samuel said. "Put your coat on," Nathan said. Samuel looked at Clara. Clara nodded once. He closed his workbook and went for his coat without another word, which told Clara something important about how much Samuel trusted her read of a situation now. When the back door closed behind him, Nathan came into the kitchen and put the letter on the table. Clara read it. It was from Crane Commercial Trading, addressed to Mr. Nathan Callahan, Callahan Ranch. Written in the same formal, confident letterhead she'd spent weeks memorizing. The language was polite. The language was always polite with Crane. That was part of his methodology she'd come to understand. Politeness as a disguise for pressure. The letter informed Nathan that a payment had come due on his feed contract in an amount that was 30% higher than the last payment. It cited market conditions. It cited the adjustment clause. It informed him in smooth, regretful language that failure to remit within 14 days would necessitate a review of the terms of their ongoing business relationship. And at the bottom, it noted that Mr. Crane would be visiting the valley in the coming week and would be happy to discuss any concerns in person. Clara set the letter down. "He's coming," she said. "In the next week," Nathan said. "That's earlier than I expected." Clara's mind was already moving. They had been working for 3.5 weeks. The case was stronger than she'd originally hoped, partly because Ed Proctor's records had been meticulous, and partly because 2 other ranchers had come forward in the past week after Ed quietly put out the word. 4 ranches now, 4 sets of contracts with the identical clause, 4 patterns of escalating charges, and the Whitfield connection documented in county records sitting in a folder at the bottom of the stack with Clara's careful notation on the front. But there were things she hadn't finished. "I still need the Helena merchant records," she said. "I have testimony from 5 people here in the valley about local prices. I need someone in Helena who can speak to what Crane actually paid wholesale, not what he charged you." "How long would that take?" "If I could get there and back in 4 days." "That's too long," Nathan said. "If he comes while you're gone." "I know," Clara said. They looked at each other across the table. "Write it down," Nathan said. "Everything you've built, in order, so that if he comes before you're back, I know exactly what I'm looking at." "You'd face him alone," Clara said. "I'd stall him," Nathan said. "I've been stalling him for 2 years without knowing I was doing it. I can manage a few more days." He paused. "But I need to know what I know. All of it, written out." Clara understood what he was asking. He wasn't a man who panicked. She'd established that clearly in the weeks she'd been watching him navigate impossible circumstances with steady hands. But he needed to understand the architecture of what they'd built well enough to protect it if it were threatened. "All right," she said. "I'll write it out tonight. Everything. In order." "And Helena," Nathan said. "I'll go the day after tomorrow," Clara said. "Early. I can make it in 2 days if the roads hold." Nathan was quiet for a moment. He picked up the letter, looked at it again, and set it down with the deliberate carefulness of a man putting down something he'd like very much to throw. 14 days, he said. "We won't need 14, Clara said. She said it with a certainty she almost fully felt. That night she wrote until 2 in the morning. She wrote the entire case from beginning to end, not as a collection of documents, but as a narrative, a story told in numbers and dates and names, each piece connected to the next, in a chain that someone unfamiliar with the details could follow from first page to last, without losing the thread. Her father had taught her that. Numbers alone don't persuade, he'd said. Numbers inside a story that makes sense, that's what moves people. She wrote Nathan's story, Ed Proctor's story, the 2 other ranchers. She wrote the identical clause in 4 separate contracts. She wrote the escalation curves and the merchant price comparisons. She wrote the county filing and the name at the bottom of it. She wrote all of it. When she was done, she read it through once. Then she read it again. It was good. She knew it was good not from vanity, but because she'd spent enough time with numbers and evidence to recognize when an argument was airtight. The only weakness was Helena. If she could get the Helena wholesale prices what Crane actually paid before he marked everything up and billed the ranches, the case moved from compelling to irrefutable. Without it, a sharp lawyer could still argue market uncertainty, still point to the adjustment clause, still introduce enough ambiguity to muddy the water. She needed Helena. She put her pen down and pressed her palms flat on the desk. She had 2 days. She would use them. She almost didn't make it to Helena. The second morning when she was already in the wagon and 20 minutes down the road, she passed Ed Proctor coming the other direction at a pace that meant urgency. He pulled up alongside her and she could see it in his face immediately. "Crane's in the valley," Ed said. "Got here last night, not next week. He's at the Dunbar Ranch right now." Clara's stomach dropped. "How do you know?" "My neighbor's boy does odd jobs for the Dunbars. Came past my place this morning. Said a man named Crane arrived yesterday evening with a lawyer." Ed's expression was tight. "A lawyer, Mrs. Whitmore." Clara thought fast. A lawyer changed the calculation significantly. Crane had never brought a lawyer to any previous ranch visit, according to everything Nathan had told her. The letter this week, the arrival ahead of schedule, now a lawyer Crane was accelerating. Something had tipped him off, or simply the natural clock of his operation had reached a point where he was moving to close things out. "Does Nathan know?" she asked. "Sent my boy up there an hour ago," Ed said. "He knows." Clara turned the wagon around. She drove back to the ranch faster than was strictly safe on frozen ground. and Ruth the mare communicated her displeasure through every stride but cooperated. Nathan was standing outside when she arrived, and she knew from the set of his shoulders, before she'd even climbed down, that something else had already happened. "He sent a rider this morning," Nathan said the moment she was on the ground. "Before Ed's boy got here. Crane's coming tomorrow, not in a week, tomorrow afternoon." "I know," Clara said. "Ed told me." She was already moving toward the house. "We need to go through everything. Now. Tonight." The Helena records. "We don't have time for Helena," Clara said. She said it flatly because there was no point dressing it up. "What we have has to be enough." She heard Nathan exhale behind her. She understood what that exhale meant. It meant he was recalibrating. It meant he was doing what she'd watched him do in difficult moments, adjusting, absorbing the change, finding his footing in the new shape of things. By the time she reached the study door, he was right behind her. "Then let's look at what we have," he said. They spent the rest of the day going through it together. Clara walked Nathan through every piece of evidence, every document, every comparison the way she'd written it in the narrative the night before. She explained each connection. She anticipated every counter-argument. She showed him where the case was strongest and where it had gaps, and she showed him how the gaps, while real, didn't break the chain of the argument. Nathan was a quick study. She'd known that since the first week he didn't have formal education beyond what the frontier provided, but he had the kind of lateral intelligence that comes from years of solving practical problems, and he could follow a logical argument wherever it led without needing to be walked back and re-explained. He asked sharp questions. She answered them. He pushed back on 2 points where he thought she was assuming too much, and on one of them, he was right, and she appreciated that more than she said. By evening, both of them were as ready as they were going to be. Samuel, who had absorbed the tension of the day with the silent antennae of a perceptive child, appeared at dinner time with his face carefully composed and his eyes moving between them. "Is something wrong?" he asked. Nathan looked at Clara. Clara looked at Samuel. "Someone is coming tomorrow," Clara said, "to talk about some business matters. It's important, and we're making sure we're prepared." "Is it bad?" Samuel said. "We're handling it," Nathan said. Samuel looked at both of them for a moment, the particular assessing look that 8-year-olds deploy when they know adults are softening information. "Okay," he said. And then, with a directness that caught Clara completely off guard, "Clara's going to fix it, right?" Nathan looked at his son. Something moved through his face that Clara couldn't fully read. "Yes," Nathan said quietly. "Clara's going to fix it." Clara looked down at her plate. She was not going to react to that. She was absolutely not going to react to that. She made herself eat a bite of bread. "Get your reading done before bed," she said to Samuel in a voice that was impressively steady. "We'll do your lesson early tomorrow morning before things get busy." Samuel nodded and went back to his dinner satisfied. Under the table, Clara's hands were not entirely steady. She noticed Nathan noticing. He looked away before she did. Walter Crane arrived the next afternoon at exactly 2 o'clock. Clara knew the time because she had been watching the road for 2 hours, which she would not have admitted to Nathan, but which she suspected he understood perfectly well, given that he'd started finding reasons to be in rooms with windows facing the drive. Crane's wagon was well kept and pulled by good horses, and he stepped down from it with the practiced ease of a man who had arrived at dozens of ranches and felt at home in all of them. He was perhaps 55, broad-shouldered with silver hair, and a face that had been handsome once, and had settled into something you might call distinguished if you didn't know what was under it. The man who climbed down behind him was younger. He carried a leather case. He was the lawyer. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway. Not visible from the front of the house, but positioned so she could hear everything from the moment Nathan opened the door. "Nathan?" Crane's voice was warm. She had expected that the warmth was part of the machinery. "Good to see you. Sorry for the short notice on the timing." "Come in," Nathan said. She heard them in the hallway, coats being removed. The lawyer was introduced as Mr. Pierce. Nathan's voice was completely impressively normal. No tension that would be audible to someone who didn't know him. But Clara knew him now. She could hear it in the slightly slower cadence of his speech, the careful spacing of his words. A man containing something very large. They came into the main room. Clara stepped out of the kitchen. Crane's eyes found her immediately. She saw the brief recalculation, a quick practiced assessment that moved from her face to her hands to the paper she was carrying and back to her face. "I don't believe we've met," he said, pleasantly. "Clara Whitmore," she said. "I help with the ranch's accounting." "Accounting," Crane repeated. The pleasant warmth in his voice didn't shift, but something behind his eyes did. A slight adjustment, like a man moving a piece on a board he hadn't expected to have to reconfigure. "Mr. Crane?" she said. "Would you like to sit down? I believe there are some records we should all look at together." Crane smiled. It was an excellent smile. "Of course," he said. They sat at the main table, Crane and his lawyer Pierce on one side, Nathan across from them. Clara took the chair at the end, which put her equidistant from both sides, with the stack of documents in front of her. Pierce opened his leather case. Crane folded his hands on the table. "Nathan," Crane said, "I'm going to be direct with you because I respect you, and I think directness is the kindest way to handle a difficult situation. The payment that's come due represents a significant amount, and I know this winter has been hard. I want to work something out. But I also need you to understand that the terms of our agreement—" "Which agreement are you referring to?" Clara asked. Crane paused. He looked at her with the patient, measured attention of a man who is choosing how to categorize a new variable. "The supply contract," he said, "of January 1882. This one." Clara placed the contract on the table in front of him. Crane looked at it. "Yes. I've had the opportunity to go through this contract carefully," Clara said, "along with Mr. Callahan's records for the past 23 months. I have some questions about the pricing. Pricing adjustments are governed by the clause on page 3, Pierce said, with the smooth efficiency of a man who'd said that sentence before. "Yes," Clara said. "I've read that clause. I've also been speaking with the merchants Mr. Crane purchases from, the people who set the actual wholesale prices on these goods." She placed the merchant records on the table. "What I've found is that the prices Mr. Callahan has been paying don't match the wholesale prices in any consistent way. The gap between them has been growing, substantially." Crane looked at the papers. His expression remained pleasant. "Market conditions," Pierce started. "I have written statements," Clara said, "from 5 separate merchants in this valley detailing their actual sale prices to middlemen over the past 2 years. The prices they describe are significantly lower than what Mr. Callahan has been charged." She placed the merchant statements on the table. A brief silence. Crane's lawyer was looking at the statements with more attention than he'd given anything else so far. Clara watched his eyes move across the numbers. She watched the subtle shift in his expression. He'd seen something. "These are third-party testimonials," Pierce said. "Anecdotal accounts of prices that may not reflect. They're signed statements," Clara said, "from business owners who are prepared to repeat them in front of a circuit judge." She paused. "The billing circuit session is in 6 weeks. I believe we mentioned that to Mr. Crane's office in our correspondence." Crane's pleasant expression didn't break, but his hands, which had been folded quietly on the table, adjusted one small, controlled movement. "I wasn't aware there had been any correspondence about a circuit session," Crane said. "There hasn't been yet," Clara said, "but there will be if we can't resolve this today." The room was very quiet. Nathan had not said a single word since they sat down. Clara had asked him the night before to let her lead, and to only speak if she indicated he should. He'd agreed, though she could see in his expression that it cost him. He was not a man who naturally let someone else carry the weight. But he'd agreed. Now she understood why it was necessary. Because Crane had been dealing with Nathan for 2 years. He had a script for Nathan. He knew how to manage Nathan's grief, his exhaustion, his essential decency. He didn't have a script for Clara. "Miss Whitmore," Crane said, dropping the misses, which was deliberate. A small repositioning. I appreciate your thoroughness, but I want to make sure Nathan understands that this kind of adversarial framing could complicate what I'm hoping can be a straightforward conversation between men who've done business together for 2 years. Between men, Clara said. Crane smiled. You understand what I mean, he said. I do, Clara said. I understand exactly what you mean. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. Then she placed another document on the table. I'd also like to discuss the contract between Crane Commercial Trading and the Proctor Ranch. Crane's smile stayed in place, but Pierce looked up sharply. I'm not aware that the Proctor Ranch has any relevance to. Ed Proctor signed a contract with Crane Commercial Trading that contains this clause. Clara pointed. Word for word, identical to the clause in Nathan Callahan's contract. His pricing escalation follows this pattern. She placed the comparison chart on the table. I've spoken with 2 additional ranchers in this valley who signed similar contracts. Same clause, same pattern. She looked at Crane directly. Would you like to tell me how that's explained by market conditions? The pleasantness in Crane's face didn't disappear exactly. It thinned. These are private business arrangements, Pierce said with a new edge in his voice. Comparing the terms of separate contracts is not. It's not what Clara said. Legal, I believe it is. Informative, I believe it is. She straightened the stack of papers in front of her. Mr. Crane, I want to give you the opportunity to respond to what I've put on this table. That's why we're having this meeting. I'm not interested in escalation. I am interested in accurate accounting. Crane looked at her for a long moment. Clara looked back. This was the moment she'd been calculating for 3 weeks. Not the dramatic exposure that was in the documents. The real work was this room, this silence. Making a man who had spent 2 decades believing that the people he targeted were too overwhelmed, too isolated, too under-resourced to build a coherent case against him sit across a table from the evidence that someone finally had. I think, Crane said slowly, that there may be some accounting errors that need to be reviewed. Yes? Clara said. I think so too. Pierce leaned close to Crane and said something low. Crane listened. His expression was doing something complicated behind the pleasant mask. Perhaps. Crane said we should schedule a follow-up meeting. Allow our office to review these materials. Of course, Clara said. I'd suggest making that meeting within the week. Given the 14-day deadline in your letter, we want to make sure there's adequate time to resolve the accounting questions before any payment discussion is necessary. Another silence. Adequate time, Crane repeated. There's one more thing, Clara said. She placed the last document on the table. It was the county filing, the one with Daniel Whitfield's name on it. She watched Crane's face, and for just a moment, just a fraction of a second gone so fast, she almost missed it. The pleasantness slipped. It didn't disappear. It didn't shatter. It slipped the way a mask slips when the person wearing it wasn't expecting the particular thing that just happened. Pierce was staring at the document. This is a public county filing, Clara said, showing Crane Commercial Trading's registered partners. I'm noting it for completeness. She kept her voice completely professionally neutral. It may be relevant to the circuit court if this matter proceeds there. Crane looked at the document for a moment. Then he looked up at Clara, and whatever was behind his eyes in that moment was not pleasant at all. But he smiled. I appreciate your thoroughness, Miss Whitmore, he said. Mrs. Whitmore, Nathan said. It was the first time he'd spoken. The correction was quiet and entirely without aggression. But it landed in the room like something solid. Crane looked at Nathan. Nathan looked back at him with the calm, settled directness of a man who has spent 30 years working land that requires you to deal with what's actually in front of you rather than what you'd prefer to be there. My apologies, Crane said. Mrs. Whitmore, we look forward to hearing from your office, Clara said. Within the week. She gathered the top copies of the documents. She had duplicates of everything organized in a second folder that lived in a locked box in the study and placed them in a neat stack. For your review, she said, and pushed them across the table to Pierce. Pierce took them without speaking. They left 20 minutes later. Clara stood at the window and watched Crane's wagon move down the drive, and she didn't move until it was fully out of sight. Then she turned around. Nathan was standing in the middle of the room. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't entirely read, not because it was controlled, but because it was the opposite. There was too much in it. Too many things at once. "Well," Clara said. "You put the Whitfield document on the table," Nathan said. "Yes. I thought we weren't going to show that one yet." "We weren't," Clara said. But Pierce's reaction to the Proctor comparison was too confident. He'd seen that kind of challenge before, and he knew how to manage it. "I needed to shift the ground." "And did it? Did you see Crane's face when I put it down?" A pause. "Yes," Nathan said. "Then yes," Clara said. "It shifted the ground." Nathan was quiet. Clara set the remaining documents on the table and pressed her palms flat on the surface and let herself take a breath. Her hands were shaking very slightly. Not much. Not enough that anyone who wasn't paying close attention would notice. But Nathan was paying close attention. He'd been paying close attention to her for weeks. "Clara," he said. "I'm fine," she said. I'm fine. You just sat across the table from a man who's been stealing from me for 2 years, and his lawyer, and you laid everything out in order and didn't flinch once," Nathan said. "I flinched on the inside," Clara said. "You didn't show it." "I never show it," she said. "That's different from not feeling it." Nathan crossed the room. He didn't touch her. He stopped a few feet away and stood there close enough that she was aware of the warmth of him, the solid, steady presence of him that she'd been quietly aware of for weeks without letting herself acknowledge it. "You told Samuel last night that you'd been moving for 2 years," Nathan said. "Town to town, working wherever you could find work." Clara looked at him. "You said you had accounting skills that no one ever needed," he said. "I said they never came up," Clara corrected. "And then you landed on my porch in the middle of a blizzard," Nathan said. "And you had exactly the skills that would save this ranch, and you used every one of them." "Nathan, I'm not saying it right," he said. "I know I'm not saying it right. I'm not—" He stopped, ran a hand over his face in the way he did when he was frustrated with his own inability to find words. "I'm not a man who talks well about this kind of thing. I know," Clara said. "But I need you to know," he said, "that what you did in there, what you've been doing for the past 3 weeks, it's not nothing. To me, it's not just accounting." Clara looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the woman who had stood on this porch 3 weeks ago in a torn coat, asking for food she didn't think she deserved, looking at the ground, because she'd learned that eye contact felt like too much to ask. She thought about what it meant that she was standing here now. "I know," she said softly. "Nathan, I know." He held her gaze. And then, because both of them were honest people, who had learned the hard way that things left unsaid have a way of becoming things that disappear, Nathan said, "I don't want you to leave. When this is over, I don't want you to feel like your job here is done and you have to go." Clara's throat tightened. "I haven't thought past the circuit session," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "I'm not asking you to. I'm just—" He stopped. "I'm just saying, I want you to know you have a place here, if you want it." The house was very quiet around them. Somewhere upstairs, Samuel was doing his reading. They could hear the faint occasional sound of him reading aloud to himself, the way he'd started doing in the past week, his voice running through the cadences of the text. "Okay," Clara said. It wasn't a decision, not yet. But it was an acknowledgement. A door left open rather than closed. Nathan nodded. Then he turned to the documents on the table. "What do we do now?" he said. "Back to practical. Back to the problem in front of them." Clara understood why, and she was grateful for it. The emotional temperature in the room needed somewhere to go, and work was a reliable place. "We wait to hear from Crane's office," she said. "But we don't wait passively. I want to send a letter to the circuit court tomorrow, not filing yet, Just establishing contact, letting them know there may be a matter coming before them. And I want to talk to Ed Proctor tonight. He needs to know what happened today." "I'll ride out after dinner," Nathan said. "Good," Clara said. "And Nathan?" She waited until he looked at her. "That moment when you said my name, when he called me Miss." Nathan's expression was completely quietly serious. "He was trying to minimize you," he said. "I wasn't going to let him do that." Clara held his gaze. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to thank me for that," Nathan said. She looked away first. She picked up the remaining documents and squared them against the table with more precision than was strictly necessary. "I'll write the court letter tonight," she said. "After dinner." She walked toward the study. "Clara," Nathan said. She stopped. "We're going to win this," he said. She turned to look at him over her shoulder. She thought about the case she'd built. The 4 ranches, the identical clauses, the merchant statements, the Whitfield filing. She thought about Crane's face when she put that last document on the table. She thought about the way Pierce had stopped talking after the Proctor comparison. "Yes," she said. "We are." She went to the study. She sat down at the desk. She picked up the pen. And Walter Crane, riding away in his well-kept wagon down the frozen drive, had no idea what he'd just walked into or how completely the woman he'd dismissed as a housekeeper had already quietly, carefully built a cage around everything he'd spent 20 years constructing. He would find out. 6 weeks would be more than enough. The letter from Crane's office arrived 4 days later. Clara was in the middle of Samuel's arithmetic lesson when Nathan brought it in from the road, and she knew from the way he set it on the table carefully with both hands, the way you set down something that might break or might explode, that it wasn't what they'd hoped for. She finished the problem she was explaining to Samuel. She made herself finish it completely, walked him through the last step, checked his answer, and told him it was correct. Then she said, "Take a 15-minute break. Go get some water." Samuel looked at the letter on the table. He looked at Nathan's face. He got up and got some water. Clara picked up the letter. She read it standing up, which was how she'd learned to read difficult documents standing, so the physical act of holding herself upright kept her thinking clearly. The letter was from Pierce, not from Crane. That was the first thing she noted. Crane was distancing himself from the response, putting his lawyer between them. The second thing she noted was the language no longer warm, no longer the smooth, practiced politeness of Crane's own correspondence. Pierce wrote the way lawyers write when they've been told to push back hard and make it sound reasonable. The letter stated that Crane Commercial Trading rejected the characterization of its pricing practices as improper. It cited the adjustment clause as fully legal and properly disclosed. It described the merchant statements Clara had compiled as unreliable third-party accounts that did not accurately reflect wholesale market conditions. It noted that comparisons between separate private contracts were legally irrelevant to the specific obligations of the Callahan Agreement. And at the end, in language that was polite, in the way a closed fist is polite when it's still inside a glove, it informed Nathan that the full payment remained due within 10 days of the original letter's date, which meant 6 days from now, and that failure to remit would initiate foreclosure proceedings on any secured assets. Clara set the letter down. "They're not settling," Nathan said. "No," Clara said. "They're pushing harder." "Yes." Nathan was quiet for a moment. "The Whitfield document. I thought when you put that on the table, I thought it would make Crane cautious," Clara said. "And it did. He left without demanding payment in person, which bought us time. But cautious men with lawyers don't fold quietly. They calculate." She looked at the letter again. "Pierce has looked at everything I gave them and decided our case has gaps. He's not wrong that it has gaps. The Helena records. I still don't have the Helena records." 6 days, Nathan said. 6 days, Clara said. She sat down. Nathan sat across from her. Between them on the table was a letter that said in legal language that everything they'd built over the past 3 weeks was being dismissed, and that if they didn't produce money they didn't have in 6 days, the process of taking Nathan's land would begin. Clara's mind was running very fast. She was measuring distances. Time. What was possible and what wasn't. She was doing what she always did when a problem reached its most dangerous point. She was trying to see the shape of the next move before she let herself feel the weight of the current one. "I need to get to Helena," she said. 6 days. "I know," Clara said. 4 days there and back if I push. That leaves 2 days to finalize the filing before the deadline. "That's not enough margin," Nathan said. "It's all we have," Clara said. "The road's in February." Nathan. She said his name the way she did when she needed him to stop listing obstacles and help her find the path through them. "I know the road's in February. I've been traveling Montana roads since November. I can do this." He looked at her. She looked back. "I'm not worried about the roads," he said quietly. "I'm worried about you doing this alone." Something moved in Clara's chest. She'd been managing herself so carefully for so long, managing her own emotions around Nathan, with the same disciplined precision she applied to everything else, that moments like this one still caught her off guard. The simple, undecorated directness of his concern. Not proprietary, not overbearing, just honest. "I've been alone for 2 years, she said. "I know," Nathan said. "That's what worries me." A beat of silence. "I'll take Ruth," Clara said. "She's steady. I'll go through the main road, not the valley cut. I'll be careful." Nathan looked at his hands on the table for a moment. Then he said, "Ed Proctor has a brother in Helena. Good man. I'll write a letter Ed can send it ahead with his fast horse tonight. His brother can have contacts already talking by the time you arrive." Clara blinked. "You know people in Helena?" she said. "I grew up there," Nathan said. Clara stared at him. "You grew up in Helena," she said slowly. "And I have spent 3 weeks trying to figure out how to get merchant contacts in Helena." "You never asked," Nathan said, and there was something in his voice, not quite dry humor, but adjacent to it the almost smile she'd learned to listen for. "I didn't know there was anything to ask," Clara said. "My fault," Nathan said. "I should have told you more about my history instead of—" He stopped. "Instead of being Nathan Callahan," Clara said. The corner of his mouth moved. "Yes," he said. "Instead of that." Clara took a breath. "Write the letter," she said. "Tonight. I'll leave at dawn." She left at dawn with Nathan's letter in her coat pocket and Ruth's breath making clouds in the cold air, and the particular focused clarity in her mind that always arrived when a deadline was real and the work was the only thing that mattered. She thought about Nathan standing in the yard watching her go. She thought about Samuel, who had come out in his nightshirt and coat hair, still disordered from sleep, to hand her a piece of paper with a drawing on it, a house with smoke coming from the chimney, and 2 stick figures and a smaller one, and below them in his careful new handwriting, "Come back." She'd folded it and put it in her inside pocket next to the Bible. She focused on the road. Heck, Helena in February was cold and busy in the particular way of a territorial capital, people moving with purpose, the commerce of government and trade mixing on the same streets, and underneath everything the hum of ambition that small cities carry when they're still deciding what they're going to become. Ed Proctor's brother was named Frank, and he was waiting for her at the stable where she left Ruth, which told her Nathan's letter had arrived ahead of her, and that Frank Proctor was a man who kept his word about meeting times. He was older than Ed Broader, with the same direct eyes. "Nathan Callahan's woman," he said, which was not precisely accurate, but which Clara decided not to correct, because she needed his help more than she needed precision right now. "Frank Proctor," she said. "I need wholesale price records from the largest feed and supply merchants in Helena. I need them going back 2 years, and I need them in writing." "Ed told me what this is about," Frank said. "Then you know we're short on time," Clara said. "Come with me," Frank said. He took her to 3 merchants that day. Not small operators, the largest suppliers in the territory, the ones that middlemen like Crane bought from before marking up and reselling. Men who kept meticulous records because their business required it. The first merchant, a man named Arbuckle, who ran the largest dry goods supply in Helena, looked at Clara's list of dates and quantities and pulled his ledgers without being asked twice. Crane, Arbuckle said when she explained what she was looking for. He said the name the way Ed Proctor had said it. That particular flat tone that carries 2 years of suppressed opinion. "You know him," Clara said. "He buys here," Arbuckle said. "Buys in volume, which is why I've tolerated his personality." He set the ledger on the counter and opened it. "What dates?" Clara gave him the dates. Arbuckle ran his finger down the columns. He found the entries. He turned the ledger to face her. And Clara saw in black ink what Crane had actually paid for the feed he'd billed to Nathan at 30, 40, 50% above cost. She wrote it down with hands that were extremely steady. She thanked Arbuckle. She asked if he'd provide a written and signed statement. Arbuckle looked at her. "Is this going to court?" he said. "Possibly," Clara said. Arbuckle picked up his pen. "Good," he said. By the end of the second day in Helena, Clara had signed statements from 4 suppliers. She also had something she hadn't expected. The third merchant, a livestock supplier named Gould, who sold to ranchers and middlemen, both had looked at her documentation and then looked at her and said carefully, "You know there was a complaint filed against Crane 2 years ago, out of the Eastern Valley." Clara had gone very still. "I wasn't aware of that," she said. "Small thing," Gould said. "Ranch family. Came in here asking the same questions you're asking. Young man, maybe 30, had a stack of papers." He paused. "The complaint went to the county office, Whitfield's office." Clara heard the name like a stone dropping into still water. "What happened to it?" she said. "Dismissed," Gould said. "Insufficient evidence," the notice said. "Ranch defaulted on their loan 6 months later." He looked at her steadily. "Lost the land." Clara was quiet. "Do you remember the family's name?" she said. "Hartley," Gould said. "Tom Hartley. Eastern Valley near the ridge." Clara wrote it down. She thanked Gould. She walked outside and stood in the cold Helena air and understood with a clarity that was almost physically painful what she was holding. The Hartley complaint was evidence that Whitfield had actively suppressed a previous attempt to challenge Crane. Not just that he was a passive partner profiting from foreclosures, he had specifically intervened to protect Crane when someone tried to expose him and then watch the ranch fail. This wasn't just fraud. This was a pattern of deliberate obstruction by a territorial official, which changed everything about where the case needed to go. Not the circuit judge in Billings, the territorial governor's office. Clara turned and went back inside to find Frank Proctor. "I need to know," she said, "who in this city is the right person to hear a complaint about the conduct of a territorial official." Frank looked at her. "How serious?" he said. "Very," Clara said. Frank was quiet for a moment. "There's a man named Aldous Webb," he said. "He's the territorial attorney. He's honest, which in this city is not as common as you'd hope, but he is. He's also not easy to get an appointment with." "Can Nathan's name get me in the door?" Clara said. "Nathan's name and my name together might," Frank said. "Give me an hour." Frank got her the appointment for the following morning. Clara spent the night in the room Frank arranged at a boarding house, sitting at the small desk, with all of it spread in front of her, reorganizing the narrative. Not just the Callahan case now. The Callahan case, the Proctor case, the 2 other ranchers, the Hartley complaint, and the Whitfield connection, all of it woven together into a single argument that showed not a businessman cutting corners, but a coordinated system designed to strip land from working ranchers with the protection of a government official. She wrote through most of the night. When she was done, she read it through. It was the best work she'd ever done. She thought about her father, about his brilliant, precise mind, and how it had broken itself against a problem he didn't have enough support to solve. She thought about what he would say if he could read these pages. She thought he would say, "You finally found the right fight." She put the pen down. She slept for 4 hours. God. Aldous Webb was a spare, precise man in his late 50s who wore his years of dealing with territorial politics like a well-fitted coat, a little worn at the edges, but still exactly the right shape. He read Clara's document without speaking. All of it. From the first page to the last, including the Whitfield section and the Hartley complaint reference. Clara sat across from his desk and waited. She was good at waiting. When Webb finished, he set the document down and looked at her over the top of it. "Where did you get the Hartley information?" he said. "A merchant in Helena, who remembered the family asking questions," Clara said. "I haven't spoken to the Hartleys yet." "Tom Hartley is in Billings," Webb said. "He works at a livery stable. He lost the ranch 18 months ago." Clara looked at him. "You know about the Hartley case," she said. "I know about a complaint that came through Whitfield's office and was dismissed," Webb said. "At the time, I had no reason to question Whitfield's assessment. Reading what you've put in front of me—" He paused. He was careful in the way that honest officials are careful measuring what he said against what he could actually substantiate. "This document," he said. "These statements. This is thorough work, Mrs. Whitmore." "Thank you," Clara said. "Who taught you to put a legal argument together like this?" "My father taught me accounting," Clara said. "Everything else I learned by paying attention." Webb looked at her for another moment. "How much time do you have before Crane's payment deadline?" he said. 4 days, Clara said. "And the ranches currently under pressure. Callahan the others." 4 ranches, Clara said. "All with similar contracts. All behind on payments that have been artificially inflated." Webb picked up the document again, turned to the Whitfield section, read it again. Then he put it down and folded his hands. "I can issue a temporary administrative hold on any foreclosure proceedings connected to Crane Commercial Trading," he said. "That buys time for a proper investigation. But I need every document you have here, originals or certified copies, filed with this office before the end of business tomorrow." Clara's heart was beating faster than she was showing. "I can have everything to you by noon tomorrow," she said. "Noon?" Webb said. "And Mrs. Whitmore, I want to speak with Nathan Callahan directly, and Ed Proctor, and the other 2 ranchers. Can that be arranged?" "Yes," Clara said. "Within the week." Webb nodded. He extended his hand across the desk. Clara shook it. It was not a dramatic moment. No one was watching. There was no audience. It was just 2 people, a desk, and a handshake in a cold territorial office on a February morning. But Clara held herself together until she was out of the building and around the corner, and then she stood against the outside wall with her eyes closed for a moment and let herself feel it, the full size of what had just happened. Webb could stop the foreclosure. Webb could launch an investigation into Whitfield. 4 ranches were going to be protected, and Tom Hartley in Billings working in a livery stable because he'd lost everything fighting the same fight without anyone in his corner. Tom Hartley might get something back. She opened her eyes. She had work to do. She rode back to the Callahan Ranch in 3 days, pushing harder than was comfortable and apologizing to Ruth at every stop. She arrived in the late afternoon of the 4th day, coming up the drive with the last of the light, and Nathan was there before she'd finished dismounting. Not running, because he wasn't a man who ran toward things, but moving at a pace that was as close to running as Nathan Callahan got. He took Ruth's bridle. He looked at Clara's face. "You got something?" he said. "I got everything," she said. She told him in the kitchen, standing up because she'd been sitting in a wagon for 3 days, and her back refused to negotiate. She told him about the Helena suppliers, the signed statements Gould and the Hartley complaint, Frank Proctor, Aldous Webb, and the administrative hold. Nathan stood across the kitchen and listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The foreclosure is stopped," he said. "Temporarily," Clara said. "Until the investigation concludes. But Webb is serious." He was angry, Nathan, in that controlled official way of a man who's just learned that someone was using his institution as a shield. That kind of anger doesn't go quiet. "And Whitfield?" "Under investigation," Clara said. Webb didn't say it in those words, but that's what it means. Nathan looked at the table. He looked at the wall. He looked at the ceiling. Then he looked at Clara. "You went to Helena," he said, "alone, in February. And you built a case in 4 days that—" He stopped. "I don't have the right words for this." "You don't need words for it," Clara said. "I need something," Nathan said. "I need you to understand what you've done. Not just for the ranch. For—" He stopped again. Clara was watching him struggle with it, and she understood the struggle because she was having a version of the same one. The distance between what was true and what was safe to say was very small right now, and she was aware of it the way you're aware of ice by the sound it makes when it starts to give. "Samuel," Nathan said finally. "If I'd lost this ranch, Samuel would have had nothing. No land, no home, no future. I had nothing to give him except this place and the work of keeping it." "I know," Clara said softly. "You saved that," Nathan said. "You saved what I was going to leave him." Clara held his gaze. "Nathan," she said, "I need to tell you something." He waited. "When I knocked on your door," she said, "I had been moving for 7 months. I had stopped expecting anything from anyone. I had stopped believing that kindness was something people extended without a price attached to it." She paused. "When you opened that door and told me you didn't serve leftovers, when you just stepped aside and said dinner was waiting, I didn't know what to do with that." Nathan was very still. "I had to fight myself not to leave," Clara said. "That first night, I kept thinking there would be a catch, that the price would come, that you would ask me for something I didn't want to give." "There was no price," Nathan said. "I know that now," Clara said. "I've known it for weeks. But I wanted you to know that what you did opening that door, saying what you said, treating me like a person and not a problem, I have thought about that every day since. And I don't think I would have fought for this ranch the way I did if you hadn't done that first." Nathan looked at her with an expression that had nothing controlled in it. "You fought for it because it was right," he said. "I fought for it because it mattered," Clara said. "And it mattered because you made me feel like I mattered first." The kitchen was absolutely quiet. Samuel's voice drifted down from upstairs. He was reading to himself that evening habit he'd developed, and his voice was clear and steady, and full of the particular confidence of a child who has discovered he's better at something than he thought. Both of them heard it. Both of them looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then Nathan said quietly, "I told you before you have a place here, if you want it." Clara looked at him. "That was before all of this," she said carefully. "Before I went to Helena and turned your business dispute into a territorial investigation." "Yes," Nathan said without missing a beat. "And now I'm telling you again. After." Clara felt something in her chest that she had been carefully managing for 6 weeks simply stop being managed. "I don't know how to stay somewhere," she said. Her voice was honest in a way that surprised even her. "I've been moving so long. I don't know how to be in a place and believe it's mine." "I know," Nathan said. "I know you don't. But you fixed my broken fence on the second day you were here because it was bothering you. You planted blue flax seeds in the kitchen garden. You put new curtains on Samuel's window without being asked." He paused. "You've been making this place yours for 6 weeks, Clara. You just haven't let yourself notice." She looked at him. The honesty in his face was complete. No performance, no strategy. Just Nathan Callahan, who had opened a door in a blizzard because he thought it was the right thing to do, standing in his kitchen, telling her she was already home. "Okay," she said. It was the same word she'd used that first night when he offered her the job. Same word, completely different weight. He heard the difference. She could see it in the way he exhaled. "Okay," he said. Neither of them said anything else. From upstairs, Samuel's reading voice rose and fell through the old pages of his book, steady and clear and unhurried, the way a child reads when he feels entirely, completely safe. So, 2 weeks later, Aldous Webb's office issued a formal notice of investigation into Crane Commercial Trading and its affiliated partners. Clara was at the kitchen table reading it when Nathan came in from the morning work. She handed it to him without speaking. He read it. He sat down. He read it again. "Whitfield," he said. "Named," Clara said. "Right there. Second paragraph." Nathan set the notice on the table. He looked at it for a long moment. "Tom Hartley," he said. He remembered the name from when Clara had told him about Gould's information. "Webb's office contacted him," Clara said. "He's been asked to provide testimony." Nathan was quiet. "That man lost his ranch," he said. "Yes," Clara said, "because he tried to do what we did and no one had his back." "Yes," Clara said. Nathan looked at the notice again. "Is there anything we can do for him specifically?" Clara had been thinking about this. "When the investigation concludes," she said carefully, "if Crane is found liable and Whitfield is removed, there may be a legal avenue for recovery of wrongfully foreclosed assets. It's not certain. It depends on how the territorial court handles it, but it's possible." "I want to help with that," Nathan said. "Whatever I can do." Clara looked at him. This was the thing about Nathan Callahan that she understood more clearly with every week she spent in his house. He wasn't a man who had been made callous by his grief. He was a man who had closed inward because the grief was too large to hold and keep the ranch running at the same time. But underneath that, under the quiet, the careful distance, the armor of practicality, he was someone who thought about other people. Who thought about Tom Hartley, a man he'd never met working in a livery stable because the same machine that had come for Nathan had come for him first, and he didn't have what Nathan had. Clara had sat in that boarding house in Helena thinking about her father. Nathan was sitting in his kitchen thinking about Tom Hartley. That was the thing she had not expected when she knocked on his door in the snow. Not just his kindness to her, his kindness as a general orientation toward the world, as a thing he carried around with him and extended without calculation. "I'll find out what's possible," she said. "I'll write to Webb's office this week." Nathan nodded. "Thank you," he said. "Stop thanking me," Clara said. "I'll stop when you stop doing things worth thanking you for," Nathan said. She looked at him. "That might be a while," she said. "I know," Nathan said. "I'm prepared for that." He picked up his coffee cup and stood to go back to the morning work. Paused at the kitchen doorway. "The blue flax seeds," he said without turning around. "When do they come up?" Clara looked at the kitchen garden visible through the window, still frozen, barely distinguishable from the rest of the ground. "May," she said. "Maybe early June up here." "That's a while," Nathan said. "Yes," Clara said. He nodded. He went back outside. Clara sat at the table with the investigation notice in front of her, and the sound of Samuel starting to move around upstairs, and the smell of the coffee going cold in her cup, and she thought about blue flax in June, the particular shade of it, the way it moved in wind, and she felt something settle in her chest that she hadn't felt in 2 years, something that felt permanently like home. She pulled a fresh piece of paper toward her. She started writing. The work was not finished. It wouldn't be finished for months. There were testimonies to organize and statements to file, and a territorial investigation to support, and Tom Hartley to think about, and 4 ranches to help return to solid ground. But the panic was gone. The desperate, relentless forward motion of a woman with nowhere to go had stopped, because she had somewhere to go. She had this kitchen, this table, this ranch, this man who opened a door in a blizzard because kindness was just how he was built, without calculation, without price. She had Samuel's handwriting on a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. Come back. She had come back. She picked up her pen and wrote the first line of the letter to Aldous Webb. Outside, Nathan's voice carried across the yard talking to one of the ranch hands, the ordinary commerce of a working morning, and Clara wrote, and the house held them all inside it, like it had been waiting a long time for this exact combination of people to fill it up. And for the first time in longer than she could clearly remember, Clara Whitmore was not moving. She was staying, and staying felt like everything. The territorial investigation moved the way official things move, not in straight lines, not on anyone's preferred schedule, and with a maddening tendency to pause exactly when momentum seemed unstoppable. Clara had expected that. She'd told Nathan to expect it, but knowing a thing intellectually and living through it day by day were two separate experiences. And there were mornings in March when Nathan came in from the fields with the particular tightness around his eyes that meant he'd been out there thinking too hard about things he couldn't control, and Clara would put coffee in front of him and say nothing, because silence was sometimes more useful than reassurance. They had developed a language for this, not words exactly, but a fluency in each other's silences. Clara knew which of Nathan's quiet moments were thinking quiet, and which were hurting quiet, and which were simply the quiet of a man who'd been outdoors in the cold for 4 hours and needed 20 minutes before he was ready to be a person again. Nathan knew when Clara's focused stillness at the study desk meant she was working productively, and when it meant she'd hit a wall and needed someone to put bread and cheese beside her hand without commenting on how long she'd been sitting there. Samuel, who observed everything and catalogued all of it with the systematic precision of a future engineer or possibly a spy, had noticed this fluency. He had commented on it once over dinner in mid-March with the casual authority of a child stating an obvious fact. "You two don't have to explain things to each other anymore," he said. Nathan looked at him. "What do you mean?" Clara said. "Like just now," Samuel said, gesturing at the coffee Nathan was holding, which Clara had produced without being asked. "And this morning when Papa was going to say something about the fence post, and you already handed him the hammer." "I heard him coming," Clara said. "You were facing the other direction," Samuel said. Silence. Nathan looked at Clara over Samuel's head. Clara looked down at her dinner. "Eat your carrots," she said to Samuel. Samuel ate his carrots with the expression of someone who has made a point and is comfortable letting it stand. The first hard news from Webb's office came in late March. It arrived not as an official letter, but as a private note from Frank Proctor in Helena, who had become their informal intelligence source inside the territorial capital. Frank wrote in short, efficient sentences that communicated more between the lines than in them a family trait, apparently. The note said that Whitfield's lawyer had filed a motion to exclude the county records from the investigation on the grounds that Clara's access to them had been improper. The motion argued that a woman with no official legal standing had used false pretenses to access official records. Clara read the note. She read it again. Then she went and found the receipt she'd kept from the county clerk's office, the small slip that Garrett had given her when she'd paid the standard research fee, which she had kept with the same reflex she applied to every financial transaction, because her father had taught her that receipts were the difference between a claim and a fact. She put the receipt on the desk in front of her. False pretenses. She had paid the standard fee. She had stated accurately that she was doing accounting work for the Callahan Ranch. She had accessed public records that were available to any member of the public willing to pay the clerk's research fee. She picked up her pen and wrote a response to Webb's office directly attaching a copy of the receipt and a clear, unambiguous account of every step she had taken in the county clerk's office, in the order she had taken them with the time of day, noted for each. She sent it with the morning rider. Nathan found her afterward still at the desk. "Whitfield is fighting it," he said. Frank's note had been addressed to Nathan. "He's panicking," Clara said. "Panicking men file motions. It means Webb is close to something that hurts. Or it means he has enough political influence to stall the investigation indefinitely," Nathan said. Clara turned to face him. "Frank said Webb is honest," she said. "Honest men in politics still have to survive politics," Nathan said. It was not cynicism. It was the practical assessment of a man who had lived in Montana long enough to know how the machinery of official life worked when it was grinding against someone. Clara held his gaze. "I know," she said. "But the receipt exists. The signed merchant statements exist. The 4 contracts with the identical clause exist. Ed Proctor exists, and the other 3 ranchers exist, and Tom Hartley exists. Webb can be pressured, Nathan. He cannot be given different facts." Nathan was quiet. "What if Whitfield resigns before the investigation concludes?" he said. "What if Crane settles quietly and nothing is ever officially ruled on? We stay protected, but nothing else changes. No one is held accountable. They both walk away." Clara looked at the desk for a moment. This was the fear she had been managing privately for 2 weeks. Not voicing it because voicing it gave it more weight than she wanted it to have. But Nathan had said it out loud now, and she owed him an honest response. "Then we take it further," she said. "Further than the territorial attorney." "There are newspapers," Clara said. "In Helena, in Billings. What we have 4 ranches, the same contracts a territorial official as a business partner. That's not just a legal story. That's a story people would read. That's a story that would follow Crane and Whitfield, regardless of what any official proceeding concludes." Nathan was quiet. "You'd do that," he said. "I would," Clara said. "I haven't because Webb asked us to hold back from public disclosure while the investigation is active. But if the investigation collapses—" She paused. "Yes, I would take it to every newspaper in Montana if I had to." Nathan looked at her for a long moment. "You know," he said slowly, "when you knocked on my door in November, I thought I was doing you a favor." "You were," Clara said. "No," Nathan said. "I've reconsidered. I think the favor went the other direction." The almost smile was there, brief and real. Significantly, Clara looked away. "Write to Frank," she said. "Tell him we need to know the moment Webb rules on the motion." "Already planned to," Nathan said. He left the study. Clara turned back to the desk. She picked up her pen. She kept working. The motion was denied on the 4th of April. Frank's note arrived in the morning, and this time, it was not between the lines. Frank Proctor did not use exclamation points. Clara had the impression he considered them a form of weakness, but his final sentence read, "Webb ruled cleanly. The records stand." Clara read it at the breakfast table. She set it down and looked at it. Samuel was watching her. "Good news," he said. "Very good news," Clara said. Samuel looked at Nathan. Nathan was reading Frank's note. He set it down. He reached across the table and squeezed Clara's hand once briefly and let go. It was the most direct physical contact they'd had. Clara looked at her coffee cup. "The investigation moves forward," she said in a voice that was doing excellent work. "Yes," Nathan said. Samuel looked between them with the patience of a child who has learned to wait for adults to finish the things they're not saying. "Can I have more biscuits?" he said. "Yes," Clara said. She got up to get them, and the morning continued ordinary and full and warm, and under the ordinariness of it ran a current that had been building since November, and that both Nathan and Clara were now managing with the particular careful attention of people who know they are very close to something that cannot be taken back. The official ruling came in May. Not a letter this time. Webb's office sent a formal representative, a young man named Cavell, who arrived in a government wagon looking slightly overwhelmed by the distance from Helena and the specific quiet of the valley, but who carried his leather case with professional precision and set it on Nathan's kitchen table with the air of someone who understood the weight of what he was delivering. Clara poured coffee. She sat at the table. Nathan sat across from her. Cavell opened his case. The ruling was 42 pages. Clara read it straight through, which took her 40 minutes, during which Nathan sat with his coffee going cold and his hands folded on the table and did not say a single word, because he'd learned that interrupting Clara while she was reading a document was about as productive as interrupting a surgeon mid-procedure. When she finished, she set the last page down. She looked at Nathan. "Crane is ordered to repay overcharged amounts to all 4 ranches," she said. "With interest. The adjustment clause has been ruled an unconscionable contract provision and voided across all active agreements." She paused. "Whitfield has been removed from office pending further review of his conduct. His partnership in Crane's operation was found to constitute a conflict of interest that invalidates his handling of any complaints brought before his office during the period of the partnership." Nathan was very still. "Including the Hartley complaint," Clara said. The kitchen was completely quiet. "Tom Hartley," Nathan said. "His complaint is being reopened," Clara said. "Webb can't restore the land directly, it's been legally transferred, but there's a damages provision. for wrongful foreclosure facilitated by official misconduct. She looked at the page. It's not everything Hartley lost, but it's something. Nathan stood up. He walked to the window. He stood there for a moment, with his back to the room. Cavell was watching him carefully, uncertain how to read this, new enough to his job, not to know yet that good news can be as difficult to absorb as bad news when it arrives after a long fight. Clara understood. She'd felt it herself reading through the ruling. Not elation that would come later, maybe. What came first was a kind of exhausted release, like a muscle you've been clenching for months, suddenly being told it can let go. "Nathan," she said. He turned around. His eyes were clear. He was Nathan Callahan, which meant that whatever he was feeling was under control, presented carefully, given only what he decided to give. But his voice when he spoke was not entirely steady. "Is it done?" he said. "It's done," Clara said. He looked at her across the kitchen. He looked at Cavell, who straightened up instinctively. "Thank you," Nathan said to the man, "for making the trip." "Yes, sir," Cavell said. He began organizing the papers back into his case. "There will be additional correspondence from the office regarding the repayment schedule. Mrs. Whitmore?" He looked at Clara. "Mr. Webb asked me to convey his personal compliments on the quality of the documentation you provided. He said it was the clearest case preparation he'd seen in his office in 11 years. Clara blinked. "Please thank Mr. Webb," she said. He also asked. Cavell paused, something slightly uncertain in his manner. "He asked whether you might be interested in consulting work for the office on a case-by-case basis. He said the territory needs people who can do what you do and that they're not easy to find." The kitchen was very quiet. Nathan was watching her. Clara felt the offer land in her chest, and then assessed it the way she assessed everything, by turning it over, looking at its shape, understanding what saying yes would mean and what saying no would mean. "Tell Mr. Webb I'm grateful for the compliment," she said, "and that I'll give it serious consideration." Cavell nodded, finished packing his case, and excused himself. Nathan walked him out to his wagon. Clara sat at the kitchen table with the 42-page ruling in front of her, and the morning moving on outside, and the sound of the ranch in its ordinary rhythms, and the knowledge that the thing she had spent 6 months fighting for was done. She sat very still for a moment. Then she put her face in her hands and breathed. Just breathed. Not crying, not breaking down. Just the private, quiet release of someone who has been holding something for a very long time, and has finally, in a moment alone, set it down. By the time Nathan came back through the door, she was composed. He looked at her with the precise, unhurried attention he always gave her. He pulled out the chair beside her, not across from her, beside her, and sat down. "Webb offered you work," he said. "Consulting," Clara said. "Occasional cases. Will you take it?" Clara thought about it honestly. "I don't know yet," she said. "I want to think about what it would look like, whether it could be done from here or whether it would mean traveling." "If it meant traveling," Nathan said, "how would you feel about that?" She turned to look at him. He was watching her with the same steadiness he always had, but there was something else in it today. Not pressure, just openness. The particular openness of a man who has decided to stop managing the distance between what he thinks and what he says. 6 months ago, Clara said, I would have said traveling was all I knew how to do. And now, Nathan said. She looked at the kitchen. At the curtains she'd put up in October, now faded pleasantly from winter sun. At the pantry she'd reorganized twice. At the kitchen garden visible through the window where the ground was finally softening into spring. "Now I'd want to come back," she said. Nathan held her gaze. "Then come back," he said, simply, like it was the most obvious solution in the world, and he wasn't sure why it had taken this long to arrive at it. Clara felt the last thing she'd been holding, the last guard she hadn't quite let down, the final careful management of the distance between herself and this place and this man-shift. "Nathan," she said, "I need to say something." "All right," he said. "I came here with nothing," she said. I want you to understand that I mean that literally no money, no prospects, no one expecting me anywhere. I was not a person with options. I was a person at the end of options. I know, Nathan said. And you were kind to me, Clara said. And I want to be very clear that what I feel about this place and about you is not gratitude. Gratitude and what I actually feel are two completely different things, and I need you to know the difference matters to me. Because I have spent too much of my life being someone who made herself useful so people would keep her around. And I don't want to do that here. I don't want to ever look back and wonder whether... Clara, Nathan said. She stopped. I know the difference, he said, between someone who stays because they're grateful and someone who stays because they want to. He paused. I've been watching you for 6 months. I know which one you are. She looked at him. Which one am I? She asked. You replanted the kitchen garden in February, Nathan said, when it was still frozen. You planted seeds that wouldn't come up until May. That's not something a person does because they're grateful. That's something a person does because they're planning to be somewhere in May. Clara went very still. You noticed that, she said. I notice everything, Nathan said. It was exactly what Samuel had said to her in October in the wagon on the way to town. The same words, the same matter-of-fact delivery. Like a family trait she hadn't known she was collecting evidence of. Something broke open in Clara's chest in the best possible way. She laughed. It surprised her, the sudden, genuine laugh that came out of nowhere. Nathan looked startled for half a second, and then the almost smile appeared, and became, for the first time, she'd seen an actual smile, complete and real, and entirely unguarded. Samuel said that to me, Clara said. Months ago. He says it to everyone, Nathan said. He gets it from his mother. The smile faded slightly when he said that, not painfully, not with the old grief weight she'd seen in the early weeks, but with the quiet, settled ache of someone who carries a loss they've made peace with. She would have liked you, Nathan said. Clara felt that land. You don't have to say that, she said. I know I don't, Nathan said. I'm saying it because it's true. Eleanor was sharp, and she didn't have any patience for nonsense, and she could out-argue me on anything, and she never asked for help. She didn't need, and never refused help she did. He paused. She would have looked at you and said finally, someone who knows what she's doing. Clara's throat was doing something inconvenient. She sounds remarkable, she said. She was, Nathan said. And she would be furious with me for spending 4 years being so closed off that Samuel barely spoke to anyone. He looked at his hands. She'd be less furious now, thanks to you. Samuel did that himself, Clara said. I just gave him space. You gave him a lot more than space, Nathan said. You gave him someone who treated his questions like they mattered. You gave him someone to read to. He looked at her directly. You gave him someone to draw pictures for. Come back. He said the 2 words quietly. He showed me that drawing before you left for Helena. Clara pressed her lips together. I kept it, she said. I know, Nathan said. I saw it in your coat pocket. She looked at him. You know a remarkable amount of things, she said. I pay attention, Nathan said, when something matters. The morning was fully open around them now, the house full of the ordinary light of a May day in Montana. From outside came the sounds of the ranch waking up the distant activity of the hands, the particular sounds of animals and machinery that formed the background music of this life. Clara listened to it. She had spent 2 years listening to the sounds of other people's lives passing through them, feeling the specific ache of the outsider who can see the warmth from the window but can't quite step into it. This was not that. I'd like to stay, Clara said. Not as the woman who helps with accounting. Not as Samuel's teacher. Not as the person who sorted out the contract dispute. She paused. Just here, as myself. Nathan held her gaze with the full, unhurried attention that was so specifically and entirely him. That's all I've been asking, he said, since December. You weren't very clear about it, she said. No, Nathan said. I'm better with fences than with feelings. I'm working on it. Clara looked at him for a long moment. You're better than you think, she said. The blue flax came up on the 15th of May. Samuel found it first the way he found most things, by being outside before anyone told him it was time to be outside, moving through the world with his particular hungry curiosity. He came in at 6 in the morning while Clara was making coffee, still in his boots coat, not fully buttoned. "It's up," he announced. Clara turned from the stove. "The flax," she said. "Blue," Samuel confirmed. "Coming up right along the kitchen garden wall. Papa's going to say he doesn't know what that plant is, but he's been looking at it every morning for 2 weeks. Clara stared at him. Samuel looked back with complete calm. "I told you," he said. "I notice everything." Nathan appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, also in his boots coat, not fully buttoned. He looked at Samuel. He looked at Clara. "The flax is up," he said. "I heard," Clara said. "I've been watching it for—" He stopped, looked at Samuel, who had his arms folded and was radiating the particular satisfaction of a child who has just been proven definitively right. "A few days," Nathan finished. 2 weeks, Samuel said. "Samuel," Nathan said. "Papa," Samuel said. Clara put her hand over her mouth. She kept it there until she was sure she wasn't going to embarrass herself, and then she lowered it and said to both of them, to this man and this boy, standing in her kitchen in their coats and boots at 6 in the morning, "Go wash up. I'll have breakfast ready in 20 minutes. They went. She heard them in the hallway. Nathan saying something low. Samuel responding with the quick, confident cadence of a child who knows exactly how the conversation is going, and she stood at the stove with her hand on the coffee pot, and felt entirely and without qualification that she was in exactly the right place. The circuit court finalized Crane's repayment order in June. The first payment arrived at the Callahan Ranch on a Tuesday, carried by the same kind of official messenger as Cavell, a different young man with the same leather case and the same slightly overwhelmed expression. He handed Nathan an envelope. Nathan signed for it. The man left. Nathan brought the envelope to Clara in the study. She opened it. She looked at the number. She sat back in her chair. "Is it right?" Nathan said. "It's more than right," Clara said. The interest provisions, Webb interpreted them generously. She looked at the number again. "Nathan? This is almost 3 years of ranch profit." Nathan looked at the envelope in her hand. "All 4 ranches got their notices today," Clara said. "Ed Proctor called it 2 weeks ago. He said Webb would time them together. Symbolic." "Ed's a perceptive man," Nathan said. "He is," Clara said. A pause. "What do we do with it?" Nathan said. Clara thought about that. "East pasture needs better fencing," she said. "The barn roof has been worrying me since February. And Samuel should have a proper tutor in the fall, not me doing my best with what's on the shelf, but someone with formal education training." Nathan was looking at her. "That was very fast," he said. "I've been thinking about it," Clara said. "For how long?" "March," she said. Nathan made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and an exhale. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "Marry me." She looked up. He was standing in the study doorway, exactly the way he'd stood in that doorway 100 times over the past 7 months, and his expression was the same one he always wore, steady, direct, completely without performance. The directness of it caught her so completely off guard that for a full 3 seconds she didn't say anything. "You didn't build up to that at all?" she said. "I've been building up to it since January," Nathan said. "I thought I'd been fairly obvious." "You said you have a place here if you want it," Clara said. "That's a proposal," Nathan said, in Nathan Callahan language. "I didn't have a Nathan Callahan translation guide," Clara said. "You do now," Nathan said. Clara looked at him. She thought about November. The blizzard, the porch, the torn coat, the Bible held against her chest. The ground she couldn't meet his eyes, because she'd learned that eye contact was something that cost more than she had. She thought about asking for leftovers. She thought about what he'd said instead. "We don't serve leftovers here." "Yes," Clara said. Nathan let out a breath. Good, he said. That's all you have, she said. Good. What else should I say? Something, Clara said. More than good. Nathan thought about it. I have been a better man since November, he said. Samuel has been a happier child. This house has been a home instead of a place where I keep the grief in order. And every morning when I come downstairs and you're already at the stove or the desk or the kitchen garden, I think this is what my life is supposed to look like. This is the version of it that works. He paused. Is that more? Clara stood up from the desk. She crossed the room to where he was standing in the doorway. She looked up at him. Yes, she said. That's more. Good, he said again. But this time she let it stand because coming from Nathan Callahan said in that voice with that expression, good contained more than most people could fit into a paragraph. Yeah, they were married in August in the Valley Church in a ceremony that was simple by design and full by circumstance because every rancher in the valley showed up, including Ed Proctor and his wife and two of the other three ranchers with their families, and Frank Proctor, who had driven in from Helena, and even Tom Hartley, who had gotten Clara's letter in June about the damages ruling and had written back in handwriting that told her how long it had been since he'd had good news to respond to. Tom Hartley was a quiet man in his mid-30s, worn by 18 months of loss, in ways that hadn't finished leaving their marks. He stood at the edge of the gathering after the ceremony, and Clara went to him specifically. Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Or I suppose, Clara Callahan, she said. Thank you for coming. Thank you for what you did, Tom said. He said it looking at his hat in his hands rather than at her face, the way she used to look at the ground. She recognized it. The damages settlement is it's not the ranch, but it's enough to start something. My own operation's smaller, but it's enough to begin, Clara said. He looked up. Yes, he said. That's the right way to say it. Clara held out her hand and he shook it, and she thought about the man who had done what she did, gone looking for the truth in numbers and documents, fought the same machine, and had done it alone without anyone opening a door for him. Tom, she said, if you ever need someone to look at contracts before you sign them, anything with a supply arrangement or a trading company, I'll write to you, he said. I will. She nodded. She went back to Nathan, who had been watching from a few feet away. Hartley, he said. Starting over, Clara said. He'll be all right. Because of you, Nathan said. Because of the investigation, Clara said. Which you built, Nathan said. Clara looked up at him. We built, she said. You and Ed Proctor and Frank and the other ranchers. You all had a part in it. And you were the one who knocked on my door, Nathan said. In November, in a blizzard, asking for leftovers. I was desperate, Clara said. You were brave, Nathan said. There's a difference. Samuel appeared at Nathan's elbow, already slightly disheveled from the celebrations, his good coat showing signs of having been climbed in. Can we eat now? He said. Yes, Nathan said. Clara said there's a cake. Samuel said, with the reverent gravity of a child for whom cake represents the highest form of human achievement. There is, Clara said. The kind with the... Yes, Clara said. That kind. Samuel turned and went directly for the food table with the focused efficiency of someone who has been waiting patiently and has reached the end of patience. Nathan watched him go. He called you Clara, he said. He's been calling me Clara for months, she said. Not today, Nathan said. Today, I thought he might want to. He stopped. The word he wasn't saying was obvious, and neither of them pushed at it.